This episode of Recording Studio Rockstars is brought to you by OWC, Isotope, Atom Audio, Lewitt, and Spectra 1964. In fact, you're hearing my voice right now on the Lewitt Pure Tube microphone through the Spectra 1964 STX110D mic pre and C610 comp limiter with Isotope, RX, Ozone, and Neutron, all recorded safely onto an OWC SSD and mixed on Atom Audio monitors. Please check out our awesome sponsors using the link in the show notes below. It's a great way to help support this show. Now get ready to rock.
People don't realize two most important things about making a great sounding record isn't anything to do with technology or the microphones you use. It has to do with intonation and arrangement. If everything is structured in such a way that there's room for it in the spectrum, immediately you have clarity. I ask my students all the time, I said, you ever push up a mix and know whatever you do, you can't get clarity in the low end? And they say, yeah, I recognize that. It's like you have a lousy arrangement.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. Howdy, rock stars. I've got a secret to tell you about how I get a consistent sound mixing over 1,000 hours of recording studio rock stars. My secret is using Isotope, RX, Ozone, and Neutron on every single episode. Right now, you are hearing RX breath control, declick, declip, DS, deplosive, voice denoise, ozone multiband compression, neutron EQ, and limiting, all from Isotope. Go to isotope.com/rockstars and use the secret code ROCK10 to get 10% off. Are you recording your own music or other people's music in your studio, but you're having trouble figuring out how to get your mixes to sound great? Do they sound kind of weak or distant or lack punch and clarity? Well, I've got a gift to help you take your mixes from sounding like basement demos to sounding much closer to professional mixes. And it's my free course called Mix Master Bundle. This course will show you how to get pro-sounding mixes from your home studio with free and stock plugins in Pro Tools, and the best part is that these mixing techniques work for you in any DAW, whether you're on Logic, Cubase, Studio One, Reaper, anything you can think of. If you're ready now to make your best record ever, then go to mixmasterbundle.com to get started for free now, and you can find the clickable link in the show notes of this episode. Howdy, Rockstars. It's your host, Lid Shaw, and welcome back to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is Dan Pfeifer, a professor in the Department of Recording Industry and a graduate faculty member at Middle Tennessee State University. He's also a native of Louisville, Kentucky. He got his Bachelor of Music degree from Middle Tennessee State University in 1983 and a Master's of Arts degree from the University of Memphis in 1987 with an emphasis in audio engineering and music production. Before coming to MTSU, Dan worked professionally as an audio engineer and producer, working with artists that included B.B. King, ZZ Top, Albert Collins, Al Green, Jerry Lee Lewis, and many others. He's also served as second vice president and member of the Board of Governors for the Memphis Chapter of NARAS, and he is a voting member of the Recording Academy and a professional member of the Audio Engineering Society. Dan has received many awards, including the MTSU Alumni Association True Blue Citation for Distinction for MTSU faculty, the MTSU Distinguished Achievement in Creative Activity Award, the Tennessee Board of Regents Academic Excellence and Quality Award, the MTSU Outstanding Teacher Award, and the Recording Industry Outstanding Alumni Award for University Service. And he was inducted into the MTSU Band of Blue Hall of Fame. But most significantly, For this interview, Dan was my audio teacher 30 years ago when I was an MTSU undergraduate student learning the basics of audio and recording. In fact, Dan taught me with a blackboard on the one hand and 3 fantastic recording studios here in this beautiful new building that they had built back then. He taught me everything audio, including the difference between various types of microphones and how they work and how they have directionality, to audio signal flow, to the science of sound and hearing, to flow charts for mixing consoles, which we used to have to memorize and fill out blank sheets during tests, to how to align an analog tape machine. Basically, Dan was my first teacher in my life to teach me stuff that would actually carry forward to change my life and career and inspire me to make records for 30 years after that. And the only part that I regret is making those stupid bubble charts to represent audio mixes back in the day. You know, the ones with a big bubble for a kick drum and a little bubble for the hi-hat. And I'm going to quote something here that shows up a lot on the internet. Writing or drawing about music is like dancing about architecture. It just doesn't necessarily make sense. That's my feeling. So very excited to be here. I also want to dedicate this episode and this interview to a good friend of mine, Ben Morton, a classmate from my time at MTSU. Ben, may your bass have 6 strings on it in heaven, and may you never have to change them ever again. So please welcome Professor Dan Pfeifer to Recording Studio Rockstars. Dan, are you ready to rock, dude?
I'm ready to rock, Lidge, man. Thank you for having me.
Man, it's such an honor to just be here hanging out with you. It's amazing to come back 30 years later. I mean, I know we've connected some through the years, but to just sit here in Studio C, the very room where I recorded my school project that I was so proud of, that I had recorded with Ben, actually. He was playing bass on it right in this room. It's great to see you again. Let's just jump right in, man. Tell us, give us a brief, story, synopsis of your story. How did you've been teaching for a long time here. I think you may be close to a whole new chapter of your life coming up at some point, but you've done a great deal of stuff. So give us a brief overview, if you will.
Well, I've had, a couple different careers. One was the professional career before coming to MTSU, where I was, what a lot of other people did. I was a musician, played in bands, and became an engineer and started recording other people's music, and then ultimately doing some production. I came to MTSU and came to Tennessee because of the recording industry program here. But I got down here and I was kind of crestfallen because I was escaping a music merchandising program in Kentucky, and I had to have half of my curriculum was business, and I did not like business.
When you say a music merchandising program, what do you mean?
It was a program designed to
go sell CDs. No,
stores? More about merchandising instruments and sheet music, and selling CDs would be part of it, but it was more about getting musicians their instruments and working for, let's say, a manufacturer and being a product specialist.
You're going to keep Mel Bay and what's the other one in business, right?
Exactly.
The bookmakers.
But, I get down here because I wanted to do audio engineering. So, I had synthesizers and stuff, and kind of love the music technology thing, and couldn't find a way to really monetize that in Kentucky. So one of my advisors told me about those 3 places to go: Berklee College of Music, University of Miami in Florida, and this little school in Tennessee called Middle Tennessee State.
Wow. So
I came down here and checked out the recording industry, importantly, management program at that time.
Right.
And they required a minor in business admin, which is not what I wanted to do. So I actually finished my degree here in the music department and minored in RIM. And it's because of Chris Haslew in the recording industry program is how I learned audio engineering beyond what I had already learned about synthesis and music technology at my previous school.
And Chris was still teaching here when I was in school here as well. Is he... I don't know the story of Chris and if he's still...
So Chris took a retirement at one point, but came back and adjuncted for us for years. And just last year was his last year adjuncting for us.
Wow.
So he started the audio program here in 1978 and was art department chair, responsible for a lot of these facilities that we're in. And, You know, it was kind of, we lovingly call him Father Audio.
Nice.
Because he taught so many of us, and, you know, you're a legacy part of that too. So, but I came down here for that and did not do the RIM program, did a music major and played tuba in the band. And that's how I got in the band, the Hall of Fame and all that kind of stuff.
You know, when you were teaching me, I didn't really know about your musicianship. I didn't know you were a tuba player. I mean, you mentioned it. I probably wasn't paying attention. but later, when I took my stepdaughter to the Nashville Symphony many years later, we're sitting there and we're in the orchestra seats, and we looked right over, and I was like, "Hey, shit, man, that's Dan right there."
Right. Well, they did a thing called the Free Day of Music, and they would invite community ensembles in. And I'm in a band called the Tennessee Valley Winds, and they're a community band here in Murfreesboro, and we got to play on that stage, which was an amazing experience. If you've never played in the Schermerhorn, go do it if you can.
Yeah, beautiful facility.
Nothing like it.
Parking sucks, but it's a great place.
Exactly. Exactly. But, you know, I did the music major thing. When I graduated, I went on the road. My first full-time professional job was with the Mr. Jack Daniels Original Silver Cornet Band, and we were on the Columbia Artist Tours. So I did 5 national tours with that group, started as a roadie and ended up as their master carpenter. But I realized at the end of that situation that I did not necessarily want to be a live sound person for my career. I really wanted to work in the studio.
I saw the master carpenter bit on your CV, on your resume too.
Yeah.
Like,
and it's interesting how fast I went from being a total grunt to being responsible for everything went on that stage, you know, and that was a great growth period for me, just going on the road and seeing the country and being in that professional environment and making sure the show happened every night. We never missed a show. You know, and that was a huge growth experience. It's kind of like what you were talking about before we started. You know, you go to school and you learn all this stuff, and then you start your career, and then you really learn what you need to know. You know, we help you understand and get a bearing, but until you really do it, you know, Education
absolutely.
2.0 is your first gig, right?
You know, and I you know, it's funny because I remember knowing that you came from Memphis because my best friend at the time, Chuck Pfaff, still a best friend of mine.
Yeah, so see Chuck.
He was like, oh yeah, I knew Dan back in Memphis.
Right.
So I guess I don't remember whether it was the same college or you know,
I think I've met Chuck
bands on the scene or something like that.
I'm trying to remember. I want to say I met him at University of Memphis. It was Memphis State back then.
Yeah.
But, you know, he's gone on to have a very interesting career himself.
Yeah.
But I decided I wanted to work in the studio, and also decided I wanted to go to grad school. So I started looking for places to go, and ended up at the University of Memphis. And I was their graduate assistant, their only graduate student. They allowed me to write my program.
Oh, wow.
So I wrote my own, put together a committee, and got people to sign off on it. And that's how I did my master's. And while I was there, I kind of redefined myself as a studio person as much as a live sound person. And I did have to do a lot of live sound in those days just to keep bread on the table. It was my go-to gig. And so I'm, you know, doing a lot of club gigs, doing monitors, front of house, doing that kind of stuff. I know
a fair amount of engineers interns graduating from college now that are, you know, still doing live sound to get it as a good way to get started too.
Yeah. In fact, here at MTSU, we've really incorporated live sound into our curriculum in a major way because there's so many opportunities for students to work in that field. You know, back when we were in school, you know, there was a lot of jobs for recording engineers. Well, that still exists, but not nearly like it did back then. So we've diversified the program and including sound for picture, live sound, broadcasting, as well as studio recording.
Yeah. Are you guys doing game audio here too?
A little bit. We are dabbling in immersive. We have an Atmos room here on campus now, so that's cool.
We're crossing off one of the questions that was coming up too, so that's good.
But, you know, MTSU has a pretty vibrant esports community, and we were one of the first universities to have that going on.
Really? There's actually like esports teams here?
Yes, there are esports teams.
Wow.
You know, so, you know, we try to be innovative, and that's something that started in our college. And of course, when you were in school here, it was the College of Mass Communication, and now it's the College of Media and Entertainment. So we broadened that also to encompass all the things that we do, including esports and all these different uses of audio.
Funny. It's even funny to think of it being called mass communication now. Back then, now everything is mass communication.
Right.
Any kind of communication is mass communication.
And yes, we even teach podcasting. So,
right. Well, maybe I can go back to school and finally get this one right.
I think you got it going. Anyway, I ended up in Memphis and in grad school and was able to establish myself in the studio community as well as doing the freelance audio work. And I worked for a syndicator that did anything that you would hear on the radio, including the music programming. So that was like my night gig while I was in grad school. And I can edit tape with anybody still today.
Yeah. Were you making tape carts? Were you editing carts together for radio?
We were doing the programming for automated music radio stations. So anything that you would hear, we did like 7 formats. So we're doing transcriptions from 45s and LPs and CDs and putting together these weekly programs.
Yeah.
And people would subscribe to them, and it's a lot of transcription, a lot of editing.
Transcription meaning like writing down text?
No, transcription, taking it from LP 45 or CD and transcribing it to 1/4-inch tape.
Okay, cool. That's for me. That'd be the easy kind of transcription. Like, don't give me a solo, like a Miles Davis solo, and tell me to write it down on music notation.
Right. This is a different type of thing, but it was very, very detail-oriented work. I mean, we were cutting pops and clicks off with razor blades.
Yeah, wow.
It's 7.5 IPS, DBX encoded. For those of you who know who that is, that is.
Yeah, that stuff is really fun too. I'm glad that I got a certain amount of experience with that too. I mean, one of my first internship was in a post-production house, and the guy who taught me was telling me all these things that like they hacked the console so that whenever he did the talk back, it put 100 hertz tone underneath his voice, so that when he was high speed scrolling through the tape,
that's right,
it would make a 1K beep as it went by, and then he could like, that's a break in the tape right there.
That's right, and you could count those beeps as they went by to know where you were on the tape.
It's just like this it's fascinating the level of engineering you had just to simply like to exist back then, just to navigate from A to B. And I guess it's probably still true now. It's just shifted to different kinds of versions of that inside the computer.
That's right. It's kind of interesting for me. I'm kind of going full circle because I'm teaching analog recording as an elective this semester.
I've been hearing that. My newest intern, Brady, was telling me that there's analog classes going on. I was so psyched to hear that.
Well, you gotta question the wisdom of a 60-something teaching 20-something 90-year-old technology with 40-year-old tape machines.
Hey, you know what? Recently, I was I forgot what it was. I was researching archived discs, and I think I had a disc that wasn't working or something. And I was just looking into it again. Luckily, I had a backup of that one. But I was just reminded, something, and maybe in Gear Space or something popped up again, and people were just talking about how analog was still works today if it worked yesterday. You might have to bake the tape and transfer it immediately.
Right.
But that was something that Steve Albini talked to me about when I was working with him, was just, he said down the road, 50 years, 100 years from now, who knows if those digital formats will be recoverable. I think somebody also mentioned that digital formats on analog tape was a pretty good storage medium, which was cool to hear.
And the Library of Congress still embraces analog fully because they know it's the one platform that they can still always reliably play back. Yeah. Where do we have a machine to play this new digital thing? I
mean, I've got a Victrola that my great-grandfather bought in 1907, and I refurbished it. And
that's cool.
Sits in my house, and it'll just play a 78 like it was yesterday. I mean, you got to put a fresh needle on every time, but
yeah. Well, the tape machines, they're all getting long in the tooth. Now, there's companies like Mara Machines that are refurbing the MCIs, and before that, Mike Spitz. ATR was buying up all the Ampex machines
and stuff like that.
Yeah, he was refurbing the ATR 102s and reselling those. So there's a little cottage industry that has come up around that to keep these machines viable. And You can still buy tape and all that stuff.
Yeah, Mara Machines is really awesome. And Chris has been a guest on the podcast a couple of times to talk about what he's doing over there, and I really applaud it,
Yeah, we worked a thing with him where we have a JH110 quarter-inch 2-track.
Hey, maybe it's my old one.
Might have been. We traded in a 16-track to him.
Nice.
That was not functional at all.
If it is my old one, it came before me. It came from Jeep Harned directly.
Wow.
It was his personal machine. So
wow.
Hopefully you got that one.
That one's got a legacy.
Yeah.
Had to look up those serial numbers.
So Jeep Harned Rockstars was the founder of MCI.
Right.
What does it stand for? Music something.
Music Corporation, Music Corporation Inc. Something like that.
Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I have it in a PowerPoint. I can tell you.
At one point,
sure.
I think it was the biggest audio company in the world.
Certainly one of the biggest ones domestically.
Yeah.
I think Ampex was the only company really rivaling them. But they did the whole thing. They did consoles, they did the multi-tracks, they did the 2-tracks. So you could outfit your whole studio in one stop with them.
Yeah, he did the console that I used to have in my studio.
Right.
The custom MCI.
The very first recording console I sat behind was a MCI 400.
Oh, cool.
Right.
Yeah.
And then I've run a 600, a 500. And I've run those tape machines all my life, including now. So.
Yeah, believe it or not, the 400 was like a grandchild offspring of the console that I had.
There you go.
Because mine was one of the few custom ones that he was building while he was figuring out how he wanted to start making production run consoles.
Right.
But they great sounding boards. Some of those really really cool stuff. Yeah. And I think Sony bought MCI later in the 80s or something.
They did. And they kept putting out some of the tape machines after that were, basically improved versions. Or some would say improved.
Right. Well, more features.
More features, yes.
Yeah. Some would say that about digital stuff that we use in the computer too. Sometimes more features is not always the improvement.
That's right.
Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't.
Exactly.
My studio is proudly powered by OWC, and I love how it's improved my workflow. OWC can connect all your audio work drives, trackballs, mix controllers, MIDI keyboards, audio interfaces, displays, or cameras so that you can work fast and focus on making your best record ever. Go look at the Mini Stack STX, Thunderbay 4, or Gemini Thunderbolt 3 dock at maxsales.com/rockstars to find the perfect solution for your studio from OWC. Cool. So you had done, your schooling in Louisville. You ended up in Memphis. You were also working in studios in Memphis, right? Or I'm not sure. I might be mixing up what order things happened in, but you had a chance to work with some great artists.
I did.
Tell us about that experience as well.
Well, when I graduated from University of Memphis, a new studio called Memphis Sound Productions had just opened up on Beale Street. And I was brazen enough to knock on their door and tell them that they needed to hire me. Well, of course they didn't.
For the rock stars who don't really know why Beale Street is significant, fill us in a little bit there, too.
Home of the blues, man. That's one of the biggest claim to fames for Beale Street in Memphis is the Peabody Hotel.
With the
not
ducks,
the Peabody, not
the ducks
Peabody.
on the roof.
I'm
or
sorry,
something?
it's the Lincoln Hotel.
Okay, but the Peabody was the one with the ducks.
Peabody's the one with the ducks. Yeah,
pond,
exactly.
Right?
But this old hotel there where W.C. Handy used to hang out, and W.C. Handy is credited as being the first musician to write the blues down. He didn't invent the blues. They had been around for, centuries before him, but he was credited with legitimizing it, actually putting it on sheet paper for the first time.
Wow.
And there was a vibrant blues community there on Beale Street. And there's a lot of the black musicians, and the black culture. And since then, it's been, as they say in the historic circles, commodified as it got restored. And it's not really, if you really dig into the history of Beale Street, it was a lot darker and seamier than it's presented now.
Yeah, I think now it's a lot of people wearing cargo shorts and flip-flops,
It's a tourist attraction.
And drinking beer.
Okay.
But,
but there's still great music coming out of those clubs there. So
and of course, rock stars, if you're not familiar, you probably are, but, Elvis comes from Memphis. In fact, what's funny is depending on how far away you go away from Tennessee in the world, I used to tell people like, oh, I'm in Nashville, Tennessee. And they're like, oh, great, home of Elvis. I'm like, well, not exactly.
Right,
it's
exactly.
A few hours away from there, But one of the artists that I had the great honor to work with was a guy named Roscoe Gordon, who he's credited as the creator of Jump Blues.
Okay.
And he told stories about going to the open mic night down there on Beale Street and, like playing at the I don't remember what theater it was, but
the New Daisy.
The New Daisy, maybe, yeah.
Well, yeah, the old Daisy and then the New Daisy, so or the Daisies probably.
Yeah, and that going really well. And then he was one of the first guys to record for Sam Phillips as Sam was starting out and doing his thing. And rock stars, of course, Sam Phillips is the one who recorded Elvis, Johnny Cash,
Roy Orbison, Jerry Lee Lewis.
Yeah.
He got a lot of people their starts for sure.
Sun Records.
And I was lucky. Okay, I'll jump ahead a little bit in my career, but I got to work out of Sun. Now, great. Sun at those days was mostly a tourist shop, and they're selling T-shirts and doing little tours, and this is where Elvis recorded and that kind of stuff. But it was still an operational recording studio, and they used to hire me to do a little engineering and do maintenance.
Yeah, you and Matt Rossbang. I don't know if you know Matt. Matt done the same thing. He started out at Sun Records.
Okay. That must have been after me or maybe before me. I don't know.
Oh, yeah. It was long after you.
Okay.
Long after you, but a great guy. He's been on the show, too. You definitely need to connect with Matt.
Well, there's a weird story I'll tell. I had a friend named Dave Aaron. For you rock stars out there who are really into the hip hop scene, the early hip hop scene, Dave recorded the great pantheon of early hip hop artists. He did most of Snoop Dogg's early stuff. He worked with Tupac. He worked with Dr. Dre. And Dave was a friend of mine in Memphis. He was an undergrad when I was a grad student.
What was his last name again?
Dave Aaron, A-R-O-N.
Oh, Aaron.
Yes, exactly. Anyway, unfortunately, Dave is no longer with us. But Sun tries to hire me, and it's like, I would rather make records than sell T-shirts and give tours. Yeah. So I get Dave the gig, right? And he's doing other audio gigs and stuff, but he had the gig for a while. And he calls me up one day. He goes, Dan, I'd like to book you as a backup engineer on this thing that we got coming up. So I asked him, when is it? And it's like, I can't, man, I'm booked. And he goes, no, you don't understand. I really need you on this date. And I said, I've already had to turn down this client once. We've had to reschedule. Who is it? I can't tell you. All right, well, I can't do it, Dave. I'm sorry. So that day comes, and I'm doing this custom record, right? I'm sure, they pressed 1,000 records, 900 of them are in a closet someplace still, right? But it's a custom record, and I'm doing my gig, and the knock comes on the back door, and it's Dave Aaron with Edge and Bono.
Wow.
So I'm probably one of the few engineers on the planet to turn down a U2 gig. And they wanted me there because I knew the room and I had maintained the room. Even though they brought in the record plant mobile to do the recording, they still wanted me there. But I couldn't, I had a obligation. I had a client. But it's just amazing that Dave brought them down. They wanted to see Beale Street.
That's great.
They wanted to meet me for some reason. I guess
So you missed the gig and still got to meet him anyway.
That's right.
Might have been a better way to do it. You didn't get yelled at for anything.
Well, it did bring my session to a screeching halt for a couple hours because, my client's looking through the control room glass because I was flying solo that day. I went to answer the door. So here's Edge and Bono walking to the control room with me, and my client's just like, oh my gosh, what's going on here? So they started getting into their music a little bit. They didn't play or anything, but they wanted to hear what they were doing, and they were very polite. And so that's my U2 story.
That's a trip, man. And it's funny because the more I hear stories, the more I realize that like everybody's got that story. I had stories like that where I had committed to something and I missed out on an opportunity, or somebody asked me, if I work on something, I was like, I don't know who that is, whatever. And then they turn out to be, their career rockets off and I missed my chance.
Right.
And if I had worked with them, then I would have worked with this producer, which would have brought in, the 5 other gigs that I also missed out on. And, it's just part of it. I guess you it
is part of it.
Takeaway is you commit to what you're doing. And the good part is when you commit to the work you're doing and you miss out on those opportunities, you also establish a reputation as somebody reliable.
That's
you can be
exactly
counted on for sessions.
That's it.
Which ultimately leads to better things.
Yeah.
But you should have taken that gig.
Well, in retrospect, right? But the other cool thing about that whole son thing is I met Sam. He was still alive. And when I was a governor, the Memphis Chapter, we awarded him a governor's award. So we got to go to Graceland and do this big reception for just the governors and Sam. And that was really neat. And I got to know his son Knox pretty well because Knox was a governor also at the same time I was. So that's kind of a neat side story to, things that I did there in Memphis.
Yeah.
But Memphis Sound Productions was the studio that I ended up getting the gig at and where I worked with most of these major artists. We had production company and publishing companies. We did a lot of records that nobody ever heard. We did a lot of custom records, but we would get a gig like a ZZ Top or a BB King now and then.
How many of us get to put ZZ Top in our resume, in our discography?
Not many. Okay. And I'm lucky that I can, in a lot of regards. If you ever really pay close attention to the credits on those early ZZ Top records, there's only one engineering credit. And there's only one production credit. Bill Ham is the producer and Terry Manning was the engineer. No assistants listed.
Really?
Right.
Yeah, so that was a little bit of a bummer.
Well, you know what? There's plenty of press about it, though, because we were in studio news and Dan Pfeiffer's assisting, Terry Manning and working with Carl Marsh and working with, ZZ Top. So there's plenty of documentation.
And here it is right now, too.
Right.
This will reach more people, hopefully. It's one of the things, though, like when it comes to credits, of course, that has changed so much.
It has.
Anyway.
It has.
And, I feel like we live in a time now where the best way to have your story told is to tell it yourself.
Right. And credits were never a thing that I was in pursuit of. And if I got on the record, great. If you spelled my name correctly, I'm even happier. Right. But, it was about the work, not about the credit. And I was very lucky to be able to work with those kind of artists.
It is tricky. Pfeiffer has 15 F's in it? Something like that.
Depends on the spelling.
That's great. And it's also funny that my friend Chuck, who Pfaff. You guys know is Pfaff, also spelled with a PF.
Right. Great. Yeah, I'm sure he gets as many misspellings as I do.
You worked with BB King.
Yeah.
Do you have any stories or memories about that? I've heard some cool ones on the show.
I only got to do 2 songs with BB, but and the rhythm tracks were already done. So we got to do all the overdubs. So there's 2 songs that we did, Lay Another Log on the Fire and Take Off Your Shoes. And I recorded horns, I recorded guitar, I recorded BB, and I recorded backgrounds and a couple other ancillary pieces. I think a B3 on one of them. But I got to record him.
Now, were you able to do that, record the horns, and not hum the tuba part out loud in the control room the whole time?
I always had to work on that, man. Fortunately, there was no tuba in that ensemble, so I was okay.
Yeah, right on.
There was a gentleman in Memphis named Cato Walker III, and Cato was a manager and also BB's cousin, and that's how we got that gig. Cool. And Cato was very entrepreneurial. He had his fingers in a lot of things. In fact, Cato was the person who gave me my first opportunity to co-produce. So there was
that's a big deal.
It was, and he saw some promise in me and was generous enough to let me co-produce 2 songs that only got released on a 45. Artist named Lance Strode, and the song, the primary song, the single was a song called "Dangerous Ground." That's
impressive that you got a good memory for this stuff too.
Well, it was a passion of mine.
Yeah.
But Dangerous Ground on one side and First Taste of Heartbreak was the song on the B-side. And I was going to say damn lucky. I was damn lucky. It went top 10 in Britain, top 40 U.S.
Yeah, you can swear
out of the box.
You're allowed to swear on this podcast, by the way. It's a rock and roll show, man.
That's true.
It's stories from the recording studio.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. But, I got my professor hat on sometimes, so.
Yeah. I don't care if you're a guy or a girl or anything in between. We all swear in the studio.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. We just had a panel of the Metal Alliance folks, and there was a few expletives issued during that, but it was great that they came to school.
Oh, yeah. Actually, hopefully Chuck Ainley is going to be on the show coming up, and I think let's see who all was out there for that. That was
So it's Chuck,
Sylvia was
Elliot
there.
Shiner, George Massenberg, Sylvia Massey, Nicole Bullis. I think that was it.
Rockstars, rewind that and listen to that again. If you go to MTSU, you could be sitting in a classroom and having visitors like that come to your class.
That's right. Anyway, Cato was also responsible for getting us BB, but Cato also is figured largely in my life as far as giving me opportunity to work with Lance, to work with BB, and hiring me as well as the studio to do this work. So I'll always be grateful to him for that.
So what was it like recording in Memphis, without, any good musicians there or anything?
The one thing about Memphis that I absolutely adored was the talent pool and the people that were still there when I was there. I was really lucky. I'll give you an example. I worked on an album for Jim Horn on Warner Brothers, and he did this record. It was interesting. He went up and down the Mississippi River and did 4 songs in all the major blues cities.
Oh, wow.
So he did 4 songs in Memphis, 4 songs in St. Louis, 4 songs in Chicago, 4 songs in New Orleans, and did his record that way.
Did he do Chicago? Did he go into, was Chess available or any of those kind of studios?
I don't know about the other studios,
yeah.
But he came in and did 4 songs with us, And I'm looking out on the floor and I realized that they brought in Paul Schaefer to play organ.
Wow.
But just as importantly, also had Teenie Hodges. And I did sessions with people like his brother, Charlie Hodges. And if you don't know those names, look up the authors for songs like Love and Tenderness and Take Me to the River, because those are the guys who wrote those songs. But they also were the musicians on all the Stax stuff, right? So they were still there. A lot of those folks were still there, and I was lucky enough to be able to do sessions with them.
That's a trip. And then let the rock stars know why we know who Paul Schaefer is, too.
Well, it's the David Letterman band.
He was in David Letterman's band. He was in the Blues leader. Brothers,
He was
right?
in the Blues Brothers, yes.
Yes, and then he made just an incredible appearance in Spinal Tap. Do you remember?
No.
Wasn't he Artie Fufkin? I'm Artie Fufkin.
Oh, I'm going to have to go look at
Kick
that.
Kick this ass, because he didn't do the promotion for the record.
I think
that was Paul right there.
He was amazing, you know, and all he did is play the B3.
That's great.
So that was one of the wonderful parts about being in Memphis. I got to work with, did sessions with Duck Dunn. I had Steve Cropper on a session once.
Wow.
And just those musicians, just the magic was there. And the other thing about that scene at that time is the music scene was the one place that the racial divide wasn't there.
Yeah. Memphis, of course, is famous for that.
Right. And especially right now with all the stuff that's going on.
Yeah.
But the reality is, you can't be hateful to the person you're grooving with.
Right.
Right. And that was the one place the entire time I lived there that you would see that breakdown and people would just be people.
Yeah. It's funny to think about racial divides and any cultural divide it's usually about people not listening to each other and not understanding each other. And, in music, you have to listen to each other. Yeah. That's what makes it all come together and work. In fact, if you don't listen to each other, it's going to suck and nobody's going to be, listening to the band or the music anyway.
Yeah. And I don't know. I just feel like I was there at a cool time.
Yeah.
Another one of my mentors was a guy named Robert Jackson, and he recorded Isaac Hayes and the Bark Hayes and Sam and Dave, and he is a big engineer and producer, part of the Stax stuff that was going on.
Wow.
And he took me under his wing as, I started engineering for him.
Stax is right in Memphis?
Yeah.
Yeah, and is it like a museum studio now?
They have the Stax Academy there, and they have the Stax Museum, but the old Stax Theater is gone.
Right.
They raised
So that was
it.
a theater that was converted to studio.
Yes, it was. And that's, and see, that was another thing that was cool about being there. Estelle Axton, the AX and Stax, right?
Yeah.
Was a governor with me in the Recording Academy at that time.
Wow. Well, here's another little tangent or a connection, a thread, rather, is one of our longtime sponsors on the show, Bill Cheney and Spectra 1964. they make the Spectra 101 preamp for Spectrasonics, which was in the consoles at Stax and at Ardent as well.
Yes, yes.
Another great place. Did you ever work at Ardent?
Yeah, I freelanced out of Ardent a lot. There's a guy named Jim Gaines. Look up that name, but it's Blues Traveler, Santana, Huey Lewis and the News. And Jim would hire me sometimes, and I would go to Ardent and work. And I have to give a shout out to John Fry, who is the founder and owner of Ardent.
Yeah, I got to meet him very briefly.
So when I was in graduate school, he gave me time to mix my graduate project in Ardent for free.
Wow.
And again, this is one of those Recording Academy connections that really helped me out so much. And that was just an amazing thing because he gave me hundreds of dollars worth of value. And he knew that I would have a better product if I could mix it there as opposed to at school.
Atom Audio can provide all your monitor needs. Whether you're setting up a first-time home studio for recording music or podcasts, or a world-class full-size studio for professional mixing and mastering in stereo or immersive sound. Featuring the XART tweeter and custom DSP onboard processing, the A-Series monitors will perfectly adapt to your studio. Get the Atom Audio monitors and subwoofers that are right for you with an extended 5-year warranty at atomaudio.com. So describe that you walked into that room to mix. Describe what you saw a little bit. I mean, we can geek out on the gear for just a moment.
Well, it was interesting. It was actually a SSL 6000E.
Okay.
It was the first SSL in Memphis, and it was actually a broadcast console.
So this was brand new tech back then. Yeah.
Yes, and it was the first SSL in Memphis, and it had Total Recall and all that kind of stuff.
He probably brought you in. He's probably like, we got to find some young guy who can come in and learn this damn thing. Figure it out.
One of my friends who was a undergrad student at University of Memphis with me was the guy who assisted me because he knew the console really well, and he was that young guy who learned it.
Yeah. But
I'll tell you, John Fry also would do things for me where I would go to him and it's like, John, I'd like to learn the Fairlight.
Oh, wow.
And he goes, okay, I'm not going to pay you. I said, all I want is time in the room and a manual. And so I would go learn the Fairlight.
Right, because you were way into synths.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that was a connection for you and Chuck, too, because I know Chuck was way into synths playing in his band, Why Be Normal.
Why Be Normal. Yeah.
And then you got to give a shout out, of course, to Ross Rice.
Ross Rice, yes.
And Human Radio. So Ross was also from Memphis, and he was, somebody who helped introduce me to Memphis, too, and just understanding, what the level of musicianship was from there. He's the one who taught me that he learned that if you wanted to be in the pocket, stop tapping on the quarter notes and start tapping his foot halftime.
He played in a band called the Coolers, and that was with Duck Dunn. And Duck used to struggle with Ross because Ross was being really precise and right on top of the beat. And one day, Doug pulls him aside and said, hey, man, you got to learn how to do this. You got to feel this right. And he did this. You don't play on 2 and 4. You ramp into them.
Right, so he's swooping his hands forward like he's doing a dance right now.
So there's this little wave thing. And he goes, once Ross, and Ross will tell you, once he realized that was the feel, he could lock into it. It was awesome.
Ross is a professor now, too.
Yeah, and Ross figured highly into my Memphis days. So when I was doing my graduate projects, I recorded him and Kai Kennedy.
Yep, Kai's great.
The pre-Human Radio version. And then they ended up getting signed to the production company that I co-owned with the owners of Memphis Sound. And that's how Human Radio was born.
Wow.
Okay,
so you know those guys pretty well.
Yeah. And we went through a lot together.
Yeah.
So we produced them to try to get a master purchase agreement, which, of course, we never were able to do. No one ever wanted to buy our masters, but Columbia signed them and then did the Human Radio
Let's
record.
break that down a little bit, what you just said, because the language might go over people's heads. So that, what you just described, still happens to your graduating students now, and people need to be aware of what it means to go out into the world and start pouring your creative energy and heart into something, and what might or might not happen Yeah.
So what happened in my case was once I got hired at the recording studio, part of their business model was to do production company and publishing companies because they didn't feel like they could monetize the thing just on sales of studio time. And so I got involved in that. And their model was kind of unique. The production company was 3 owners, one of the studio group, a lawyer, and me. And their theory was we'll hire the producers to work in these genres, and Dan can record anything.
Yeah, nice. Nice.
So I got to do a lot of cool stuff in a lot of different genres.
And it's good that they had a lawyer on the team because they're like, we also need to get this to go somewhere afterwards.
That's right. And the model ideally was we would bring in these artists and we would develop them and do master recordings and try to get labels to buy the masters. We never were successful in getting a label to buy a master. Anytime that they were interested in an artist, they wanted to sign the artist, bring in their own producer, and do their own thing.
Right. And the reason I bring it up is because I think it's a typical scenario where when we start out, of course, this was a little different in your case, but for an independent like myself, when I came out of school, it was like, I want to produce stuff. And then if I really kick ass and we do great work, maybe the record label will sign the band and they'll use that recording. And that did happen in some scenarios with some people, but often, it's rare and they want to swoop up the band and then, recreate the thing,
right.
At a higher scale or a higher level. And I hate to say it, but more often than not, the labels were correct. They knew what they're doing,
and I think in this case they were. Now, some people would argue that, what we did with Human Radio was better than what Columbia did with Human Radio. I won't mention the name of the producer, but it was still a great record.
Yeah.
Now, I think some of how it got marketed was not necessarily wise. I don't think it's good to have a lead single from a band from Memphis called Me and Elvis. Immediately gets labeled as a gimmick, right? And I think those were some unfortunate choices, perhaps, but I was so far removed from that decision chain at that point, and I was just like, I'm glad that those guys got a record deal and they were able to make that record.
Well, it's also fascinating to hear stories where, you hear a story about a whole group of people, a whole band, a whole, attempt to just go for it and really make it in the music biz, and then maybe the story is that the band got so far and then, kind of runs into a wall or something where it just didn't go further than that. And, not trying to say anything negative about it, but just describe it in terms of, that's a common story, and we still see that today, and the artists that can push through all that, it's, I'll say it's rare that artists really push through to the next level. It's hard to do. There's a lot to be said for artists and engineers and producers that stick it out long term and succeed just by simply still being on the scene, still making records down the road. But the ones that break through to that superstar level, it's there's a lot more of us that put our time and energy into stuff that never breaks through to the superstar level.
Right. And even with our work with Human Radio, we did 3 different iterations of Human Radio before we ended up with what Columbia was interested in. We worked with them for a couple of years and did a lot of recordings in different fields.
I bet that was great education for all of you.
Oh, it's awesome. And I got to call out to somebody else who unfortunately is still no longer with us, a guy named Jack Holder, because he was the producer that we hired to do that work with Human Radio. And Jack was an amazing guitar player and an amazing human being. And if you really look under the hood on a lot of records, you'll see his name. The Tracy Chapman record, for example.
Oh, yeah.
He figures big on her first release, and, nobody knows his name.
Or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But Jack was a primary musician on that record. So Jack was another one of those people that taught me a whole lot about how to produce a record and attention to detail. Oh my gosh, tuning, Jack and tuning.
Yeah, well, back then, what was tuning? Tuning was do it again. Right?
Tuning is turn off the air conditioner and dial in that new guitar string until, and sometimes bit by bit, if you had to make sure the tuning was always correct.
It's amazing. I remember going through that learning process too, and learning stuff like, you park the strobe tuner right there on the console, and you're checking it, spot checking it between everything. You learn things like, no, just because you tuned it down there at that chord doesn't mean it's in tune at this chord
exactly,
up here.
Exactly. And that's exactly one of the things I learned from Jack, Let's start with intonating the guitar and then getting good strings on it, and then thinking about where are we on the instrument and fine-tuning to that level.
And listening for it. Or, sending it back off the tape over to the strobe tuner again and checking, is it really in tune at that other chord,
I used to have a single-space roll-in tuner, LED tuner, and I would put it in the window of the control room, put it on a bus. So I could take any musician and put them on that bus, and they could tune through the window to one tuner.
Right, because back then that was kind of a big deal
because tuners would drift, right?
There was this fear that all the tuners weren't the same.
That's exactly right, and that still happens a little bit now, but it's not nearly as bad as it was then.
Yeah.
So we would all tune to a common tuner, and then be diligent about it, So Jack imparted a lot of those values to me.
Which, of course, that stems from the orchestra.
Exactly.
The orchestra. You're the first violinist, right?
That's right. That's right.
Well, and people don't get isn't it the pianist, though, if you have a piano playing?
Well, the piano's always hateful to tune to, right? It always is, because it's the complexity of it and the stretch tuning, right? But people don't realize two most important things about making a great sounding record isn't anything to do with technology or the microphones you use. It has to do with intonation and arrangement.
Mm-hmm.
So if everything is structured in such a way that there's room for it in the spectrum, immediately you have clarity. I ask my students all the time, I said, you ever push up a mix and know whatever you do, you can't get clarity in the low end? And they say, yeah, I recognize that. It's like you have a lousy arrangement.
Yeah.
You ever push one up and it mixes itself? Yeah, that's a good arrangement, right? Because the music itself is already organized in a way that makes sense sonically.
It's sort of the irony that mixing happens long before you mixed it.
That's exactly right. Well, it's that chicken and egg. You mix something, it's like, oh, I should have done better in tracking. You track something, it's like, oh, I need to think about the mixing component. So it is that cyclic thing.
What is it? Joe Gilder always talks about get it right at the source. GIT, I can't even say.
Yeah, but
GERFATS or whatever it is.
Right. And that's absolutely like true,
Yeah, so important stuff. And, it takes a while to learn, I think. I think studying and listening to music that you really love the sound of, paying close attention to what's actually going on in the instrumentation. And then the next level is trying to do it yourself, and then paying close attention to, like, does what I just did really sound like what I was trying to copy, or does it sound like totally different, and is it a mess? There's so much stuff like learning to record a bass part and discovering things like, oh shit, if I didn't mute that ringing E string or A string, it's actually still going when I play the next note on the other string, and it's destroying the low end of this mix right now.
Right. That's absolutely true. And those details, they're not just details for a reason. They really make a huge difference at the end of the day. So. Yeah.
And, having great musicianship, just great musicians who understand that. And, I will say Steve Eby, another member of Human Radio, he shared a story with me about that difference between being a hot musician in a band versus a hot musician in the studio. And so when he told a story about going into the studio for the first time and playing, and he's known as a very precise drummer, right? Very, very precise, very skilled. He can read the sheet music and play it and all that kind of stuff. Don't know if he can play the Black Page from Frank Zappa, but I don't know who can, actually.
Steve Vai.
Well, yeah, right. The drum page. I don't know. But so Steve was telling this story, Steve Eby was telling the story about going into this, and then he played and he felt so good about it, and he went into the control room and they're playing it back, and the producers are all like looking funny and have these bad expressions. And he was like, what? And they're like, what's that sound? And they zoomed in on it, and they zoomed in on his kick drum, and his beater was like hitting the kick, and then bouncing one more time and hitting it again. This stuff that you didn't notice in the band rehearsal, but when it's under this magnifying glass in the studio and you try and amplify it into this huge big deal out of a pair of speakers, it really shows. And so he had to learn how to really adapt to the studio. And I've just seen that on every instrument, all the acoustic instruments that are played by hands and feet and stuff like that, particularly,
And it applies to other things too. You talk about, everybody in the room having the long face, right?
Yeah.
This is a Jack Holder, Ross Rice story. And I'm mixing one of those songs, and they're out at lunch and they come back in. And I'm all proud papa. I think this thing sounds great. And it did sound good. It was slick. It was well-defined. Everything had its own place. All the reverbs were detailed and all that kind of stuff. So I'm really happy about it. And they come in and I hit play, and, before the first verse is over, I see the faces fall. It's like, I just stopped it. It's all right, guys. You're all not digging it. What's up? And Jack, much to his credit, looks at me and goes, Danny. He used to call me Danny. Danny, what's this song about? And I couldn't tell him. And he goes, this is a great mix technically, but it's exactly wrong for what the message of the song is.
Nice.
And it just bowled me over, so we just pull it down and mix it in an hour, and it was excellent.
Did you start with the vocal this time?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that is one of the things that took me a while to discover too, was that I learned about myself that the lyric was the last thing I paid attention to. And sometimes I wouldn't know what the song was about until we were almost into mastering. And I was like, wow, that's really striking. And so I really tried to teach myself to pay better attention to that at the very beginning and let it help guide everything,
So when I teach my studio production class, I'm well aware of this. A lot of people operate that way. I operated that way for a long time until that day, right? So when I teach my studio production class, on the very first day, I'll put up a recording and I say, all right, just write down your impressions about this recording. And I'll go around the room, and I am leading them down the garden path a little bit because, we train our engineers to listen like engineers. So they're telling me about bus compression and kick drums and reverb times. And
giant bubbles, little bubbles.
Exactly. Well, we quit doing that. At least I did. Anyway, but then I just used the moment of, all right, no one told me anything about the lyric or what the song is about. And if I do the same exercise with my brother and sister, that's what they're talking about, the singer and what this message is.
Right.
And you all just blew right past it and went right to kick drums and reverbs, right? And I said, as producers especially, as engineers, you need to know what the song is about, but as producers especially, that's where you start. You got to know what that message is, and...
Or start with the snare.
Yeah, right. You're going to do that mix? Let's solo up the kick drum. Let's start there. Sorry. But, it is always amazing how many students have this aha moment when I do that, because they're not thinking about the lyric. They're not thinking about that message. They're not thinking about the singer, Yeah. And we've trained them not to, in a way.
Well, we learn how to pay attention to all these things that we've never paid attention to before.
Right.
It's fascinating to us. And they're things that we have some control over, ostensibly, where, unless, maybe for the songwriter or the producer, we might have some guidance about the lyric and the message. But, that's one of the things where it's like, it just is what it is,
right.
Coming from the artist. And we're like, how do we carve everything else around it? But
in the production class is a decided departure from the engineering classes. I don't talk about microphones. I talk about singers.
Yeah.
So it's that deal.
Yeah. So here's a good reminder, rock stars. Take any production and imagine a different singer's voice on it, and the listeners will have a completely different perspective on whether it's any good or just sucks.
Yeah, that's
People
right.
just listen to the singer's voice first. Everything else falls in after that.
But we're all trained as engineers and producers and musicians to listen differently. And that's the big thing.
Yeah, right now all I can hear is that I'm sitting in a squeaky chair. Interview. Rock stars, I hope you don't hear it on the mix.
That's right.
Go Isotope.
There you go. Exactly.
If you are mixing music, podcasts, or audio for video, and you want it to sound amazing, then Isotope has got your back. With RX, Ozone, Neoverb, Nectar, and Vocal Synth, you'll have a collection of powerful apps and plugins that will help you get a professional sound in no time. Whether you're looking to clean up your vocal recordings with RX, master your tracks with Ozone, or add depth and ambience to your mixes with Neoverb, Isotope is your magic wand for awesomeness. Plus, with Nectar and Vocal Synth, you can easily add creative effects and unique textures to your vocals and instruments. From subtle mix enhancements to extreme sound design, Isotope takes your music and podcast productions to the next level. Go to isotope.com/rockstars and use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off. Hey, Rockstars, we're back now for the jam session, aka the second half of this show. My guest today is Dan Pfeifer, professor extraordinaire at Middle Tennessee State University and my professor from 30 years ago in school. Danny, ready to jam, dude?
Always ready to jam.
Glad to have you here, man.
Always.
So tell us a little bit about, let's start jumping into some tech talk and the school and stuff like that. Tell us a little bit about what's going on at MTSU now with the studios. We are joining this podcast from Studio C right here, which is the same studio, almost the same as when I was here at school.
Yeah, this is the oldest studio existing on campus. Now, there was 2 previous studios on campus before this one was built. For those of you who might remember the Haynes House.
Yeah, that's going way back. That was before my time, actually.
That was before your time,
Just
right?
before.
In 91, they built the Bragg building, and we could no longer use the Haynes House because we had 2 new studios.
Yeah.
But in 1987, they built what was then Studio A, but it's now called Studio C.
Which is where we are right now.
Which is where we are right now. And
it's a small studio, but it's cool, man. And when I was here, there was a Neotech Elite console right there, right? And there was tape machine, and it was like a big old deal. And then the little ISO room we walked in through was where we set up the drums.
Right.
You know?
So Bob Todrank designed this room initially, and then Carl Tatz a few years ago came in and renovated it for us.
Cool. Yeah. So I'm looking over at it now, and I can see it's, set up Phantom Focus system and it's a SSL AWS 900 Plus console now.
Yeah.
That's a great mixing board.
Yeah. It's a great fit for this room.
Now, doesn't that one do a combination? It's an analog console, but doesn't it also do control of
It does
Pro Tools?
The control service, yeah.
Yeah, and so do you guys use it in that aspect?
In the advanced classes, we do.
And how does that work if you're using it? So the faders will control the faders in Pro Tools.
That's correct.
But you might also would people typically use it just as a digital controller and mix in the box at that point, or would they also break it back out through the console?
Yeah, well, all the AWS consoles were designed to integrate with a DAW. So it's a single path architecture as far as each channel goes. So when you're tracking, you use the channels to take the mic pre to your multi-track, but then you use the mixer in Pro Tools or wherever your DAW is as the monitor path. And you just bring back a 2 mix into the monitor system in that way.
Yeah.
And then when you're mixing, you have the full capacity of the console for mixing capability. But there is a focus button on the console that allows you to run the DAW layer with faders and they call it a D pot. So you can assign that to like your PAM pot. And you can actually put plugins on the TFT display, but no one ever does that. They just go to the computer and do the plugin there. So it's designed to integrate with DAW. It's designed for the DAW world.
I can't remember. Does the AWS console have full recall on it or anything?
It does have total recall.
Total recall.
Okay.
Which, Rockstars, if I'm remembering correctly, that technically just means we can recall all the EQ knob positions and stuff on the console.
Yeah, all the switches and knobs can be recalled, but it doesn't do it for you. You had to manually go through and follow these little screens and set them back manually. Right,
exactly.
Not like a digital console.
So it's almost like there's 2 layers of automation, there's one called automation, which is the faders and the mutes.
Right.
And then there's the other, which is total recall, which is what are the settings of all the knobs that are on the console.
Essentially,
right?
And the nice thing is it does the entire console. So it takes that snapshot so you can really recall everything that you captured with it.
Yeah.
So.
And now the AWS, I took down, I think the 924 and the 948 to my Bonnaroo Hay Bale studio for a few years. And in that case, I knew it did all these cool things with Pro Tools, but I never used any of it because we were just mixing analog straight through the console. And it sounded fantastic for that really, really great sounding board.
We actually have 3 AWSs. We have this 900, which was our first one. And then we have 2 AWS 924s. And those are in our new Studios D&E.
Yeah, that's great. I was going to have 3 AWSs, and then I decided not to at the last minute. No, not really. They were a little bit, they were a little out of my budget, but they're great consoles.
Right.
Well, very cool. So, yeah, boy, I have some funny memories of doing my song for your class when I was here in Studio C here. I was in a band called Moon Biscuit.
Moon Biscuit.
Yeah. And Ben, who I dedicated this episode to, was bass player with me in that band. Dave Feathers playing drums. Clint Vick, I think was his last name, right? Clint, who played guitar. He had one of those Steve Vai guitars with the handle on top.
Right.
And he could play it like that too. And then Chris Jackson was our singer. And the song was called Hannibal the Cannibal. It was right at the time when that movie came out.
Right. So
and I don't know why you wrote a song about it, with those lyrics, but we did. And it was just like totally ridiculous.
Well, pop culture makes its way into songs all the time. So
yeah, but it was fun. Like I was in here having such a good time doing that project. And I remember learning things like if I slowly rocked the reels of tape, I could get the time code positioning like spot perfect, and I would unmute the sound on tape right when it happened and then mute it again right after it went away. So I like programmed all this really complex muting into the automated mix, and I thought it sounded so cool, and
Disc mix.
That was the
automation system that was on the Neotech. Yeah.
Wow. And I wonder if Disc mix is so Mike Ketchell of Mike Tech was one of the early automation designers, but I think his was the one that was MIDI, that you could integrate MIDI. I don't know if it was Disc Mix or not. It might have been before that.
I don't know if it was Disc Mix or not.
Yeah, anyway, there's quite a history about automation stuff. And then Paul Wolf has been on the show too. I think he had some stories to tell about early automation as well.
And, as a side story, because of automation systems and console computer systems and SSLs, I started writing manuals.
Oh, right. You've been writing manuals for...
Mostly API lately.
API.
But I've written for SSL and Studer also. And where I got started on that was we had a SSL 4000G. And students would struggle because you had the computer manual and you had the console manual, but then you had, a dozen addendums for each. And students really had a hard time navigating that. So I contacted SSL and said, can I integrate all this? Will you send me the materials and let me integrate all this? If you let me do that for my students, I'll do this for you. And you can use my writing, put it out there, and which they did. Although my greatest heartbreak there was right when I finished that work, here come the J&K series consoles.
Oh, man.
So they kind of had moved on from the G series platform at that point as a company.
Well, if it's any consolation, and I'm embarrassed to say this, and it's not going to be the manual that you wrote, but it is the ones that you Xeroxed and printed out for us that we had to get when I was at school.
Yeah.
It's an unfortunate indication of my pack rat nature. I think I still have all my MTSU manuals from class in my basement now.
Yeah, in those days, we would write the manufacturers and get a license to duplicate it for students.
Yeah.
And then we'd have the print shop here take these collections of manuals. I used to have to put them together. I hated it.
I bet, man.
And I would, make the multi-track recorder manual, the console manual, and we would make all these collections, and then the print shop would do them and sell them in the bookstores.
Here's something that'll make
But that
you
was
feel
pre,
better about
kind of before you could find this stuff widely on the internet.
Right. We didn't have internet.
Well, it was the fledgling
barely
parts of it.
getting started at that point.
This
might make you feel better about it. Remember that the book Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance? I think he was a manual writer. I think that was his gig. He wrote manuals and something like that.
Well,
and he was cool. That was the analogy there.
Well, Studer and Studer especially, their manuals were written by their technical engineers, and most of them had never made a record. And so when we bought a Studer 950 digital console for our Studio A, I went to them and say, hey, I have some experience doing this. Would you all like a better manual? So they hired me to write the D950 manual. And I wrote it in a way that a practitioner would understand it. The way the Swiss had written it was pretty much rocket science. And you could tell that there wasn't the context there. And then fast forward, you've interviewed Larry Dropa. I don't know if you ever interviewed Dan Zimbelman, who used to be head of sales. If you get Dan, you ought to get Dan. Dan will tell you some stories. Dan's one of my favorite people. So is Larry. And
bring on the Dans.
Yeah, but they liked how I wrote because I had made records before, so I had that context. But I also am a teacher, so I know how to write in a way that it makes sense, so somebody could pick it up and understand it, by themselves without having a lot of explanation. So for the last 12 years, I've been writing for API. I've written the manual for every console they're currently producing.
Wow. Next time, that's going to really that'll be cool. Next time I read something, Rockstars, if you got anything written about how your API works, now you know where it's coming from.
Yeah. And they'll let me do a module here and there. So, but we're talking about automation, and I think API has arguably the best console automation package out there right now in their Final Touch
nice
product.
Nice.
And it's, designed to work with their consoles, but it's so, user-friendly and so capable, and you can make it do backflips if you want, but you don't have to, so that's a pretty neat product out there.
Final Touch. Yeah. I'm not sure if I've used Final Touch yet. Last time I mixed on an API was Studio B over at Blackbird, on an automated console, and it was flying faders. I think
it's flying faders on that console. Yeah.
Which is not. That's its own company, right?
That's right. That's a third-party product.
Yeah. Well, it's pretty amazing. I mean, I bet automation has come a long way.
It
it's
has
a very
and
different
hasn't,
experience.
because we rely so heavily on the DAW to do a lot of that work. And most people these days are doing hybrid type of mixing. So the automation system doing backflips is not nearly as important as it once was.
Yeah.
And just look at the SSL product. Their automation system used to be phenomenal. But now it's pretty rudimentary because they realize so much of it's happening in the DAW, and that integration with the DAW is really important to what they're doing now.
Here's the thing, though, that I've thought about recently when it comes to the SSL automation and what goes on with the way we mix these days. With SSL VCA automation, for a very long time, the faders didn't move, right?
That's right.
So there was a whole experience of mixing where you had to use your freaking ears.
Right.
You had to listen to hear if it was doing a thing or not. You didn't just see things moving and see lines on the screen.
That's right.
And, it's just another example of how we do so much with our eyes and forget to do it with our ears.
Mm-hmm.
I'm constantly trying to retrain my ears to listen.
Well, it's interesting. Right now I'm teaching an analog recording class. And for our undergraduate students who are so computer-oriented and so DAW-oriented, it's a big departure for them. And I think the big value for that is session planning. Right, because you're track limited for sure.
The first question they have is they want to know how long the battery lasts in the tape machine.
Exactly. But, they had to think about their management, the discipline of what they record and when and how they put it down. But I think the real value for most of my students right now is not having the waveform display, not having the EQ, curve in front of them. So all they have is a meter and an LED. Visually, they are forced to listen differently. And I think that's where the real value of this class is right now.
Yeah. Well, the nice thing about the meter is it's just whatever overdub you're doing, just have it hit 0 and stay there, and you're going to be good. As long as you align the tape machine well.
Yeah, exactly.
Speaking of which, man, that was such a thrill for me to learn analog alignment from you in class. And I specifically remember, like, really, like when I took these courses from you, it was the first time I was ever really excited about learning in school, to be honest. And it was like,
thank you.
I'd done all my high school stuff. I'd done 4 years of college. I'd been in architecture school and realized I wasn't really all that excited about architecture. I mean, I loved a lot of what I learned, but it wasn't, I saw guys that carried their sketchbook and busted that out whenever they had a chance to do it. And I wasn't that guy. I busted out my guitar and wanted to play music,
Right.
And when I came here, it was like, I was excited about homework. I was excited to learn this stuff. And I went home and I wanted, I read the book, and did my homework because it was cool as shit,
You normally did your homework.
I normally do. Oh, good. Hopefully we got some good anecdotes here.
So I have you in 2 classes in 1 semester, right? I'm teaching audio engineering over here in Studio C. And I'm teaching you electronic music.
Oh, yeah. Was like MIDI lab and all that?
We were in the MIDI lab, right? So I had this assignment at that time that I kind of quit using, but we had a bend in the program about we want you all in the trades, looking in the trades and reading articles and, because that was the internet at the time, right?
Yeah.
The trade mags is where we got this kind of information.
Yeah. We didn't have tape op back then. It was Mix Magazine, maybe.
Mix Magazine.
Keyboard.
Yeah, keyboard.
Electronic Musician or something like that?
Yeah, Electronic Musician.
DB was already old news from the 70s.
Yeah, and Post was around if you wanted to get into that world. But so I gave this assignment where you had to go read an article and review it. So you did it for my engineering class, and I graded it and handed it back. I had a very similar assignment in the electronic music class. So I'm reading this thing, and it's beginning to sound familiar to me. And then I look very, very closely at this piece of paper that got turned in, and I could see where you had whited out my corrections from the engineering class and turned it in the MIDI class.
Oh, man.
So I write a big 0 on the top of it and said, you've done this before. And I handed it back to you. And much to your credit, you said, I'm busted, dude. I own it. I did it.
I thought I was over my plagiarizing days back then.
Well,
I was plagiarizing myself, I guess, right?
Yes, exactly. That's what you had done. But it was kind of, when I figured out what you had done, I had to laugh about it, and then, I really gained a lot of appreciation for you that day when you just totally owned it. You didn't bullshit me. You didn't start saying, no, you just said, all right, man, I'm busted. It's like, all right, okay.
Oh, man.
That's pretty, I don't know if you remember that or not.
I don't even remember that at all. I just, but I do remember taking the analog alignment test, and it was like, we literally had like a closet with a tape machine in it. And it was the same closet that had like DAT editors. Mm-hmm. So you had to like practice editing editing a song down from DAT to DAT.
Exactly. We now affectionately call that room the edit lab.
There you go.
But it was a closet that we put a bunch of gear in.
Yeah, it was tiny. And little did I know that I'd spend a career working in control rooms that size too, at different times. But it was cool, and then I really got into analog. I had a MCI JH16 for many years myself and a JH110. The first studio I was at, Randy Blevins of BAE.
Randy Blevins, wow.
He came in and he would work on the machine. I was like, how did you do that stuff? And this, I just learned how to do it all at MTSU from you. And so then I went over and worked for him for a while. I learned more about, the guts of the machine and the electronics, and then Steve Sadler was a friend of mine for many years and would come over and tech my machine. And sadly, he's gone now. But it's really important to keep the art form alive. Keep that knowledge going too. And it's great to see that you guys are bringing it back.
Well, we teach it as an elective now and then. And it is fun to do. I enjoy it, and of course, that's how I cut my teeth, so it's old school for me.
And it's fascinating, the deeper you get into it, you start learning all these things that, like, analog tape, it's sort of a flexible musical decision. Like, you think about it at first, you're like, what's the right answer? I need to align it to this right answer. And then you start learning, like, oh, there's a variety of right answers, and I can push it this way or push it that way. And, you know, and then I go work with Steve Albini, and he'd talk about aligning it by ear, you know, aligning the bias frequency and the low frequency by ear. He's like, you just listen for the boulders, the rocks and boulders down low. It's like, what's that all about, you know? And then one of the last times I really used it intensively was this band The Living Things. We were doing a record out at Sunset Sound, and they wanted to get into tape. You know, this was right at sort of the death of that whole thing, like where everybody's finally like, all right, we should just work in the computer. But they still wanted to give it one more go. And we had 2 machines lined up, and it was like, what tape format do we want? And I was like, I'm going to align every channel of this tape machine to a different tape format and a different speed so that we can record it on each one, and then you guys can pick the one you color, like, you know, all of which was just an ultimate waste of time. But it was cool, you know, because we also got to the end. It was like, we really liked 50 nips, 456, and I don't remember the rest of the details. But, you know, just like even the MRL tape you choose determines, you know, how hot you're going to align things and all that stuff.
Reproducer test tape, serial number, blah, blah. I could recite all that stuff.
Yeah, what was that? That guy's the MRL voice. He passed away in the past 10 years or something like that too.
But he has actually a guest spot on a Tubes record.
Really?
Right. There's a Tubes record called The Completion Backward Principle. And he comes on at the beginning of it and it says, if you can at all manage it, you should listen to both sides of this record in one sitting.
That's great.
And it's his voice. So every engineer on the planet goes, oh, it's the MRL
cool,
guy.
awesome.
You know?
And then they're waiting for beep.
Exactly.
Oh, man. Well, that was cool. All right, so let's see. Now you guys have a number of studios here. Things have changed. We should move forward a little bit. So here's a question. There's 2 ways I'm going to ask this. One is the question I wrote down, and then in the spirit of what's hot now, you're going to love this. I went to ChatGPT and asked it, what questions should I ask Professor Dan Pfeifer from MTSU for my podcast recording studio Rockstars.
And what did the AI have to say? So
the AI told us these questions too. Let's see. Well, how does this parallel the one I wanted to do? Well, we'll just start with the first one. Go there. So here's AI question number 1. Can you share your experience in the music industry and how it has influenced your teaching approach? I feel like you kind of spent the first hour talking about that.
Yeah, right? Kind of define the universe and give examples, you know?
Yeah, exactly. All right, so here we'll go to something a little more current for students. What are some of the key challenges facing recording studios, and I'll just add, and graduating students today? Yeah, and how do you prepare your students to tackle them?
Well, I think first off, there's a lot of myths out there about working in our industry. You know, people say, you know, making records is dead.
None of those myths come from artificial intelligence.
Probably not. But, you know, if you really think about the uses of audio, just in general, there's more need for that now than ever, right? And, you know, you don't have to do the traditional major label thing to be making records for a living. You know, there's all kinds of people wanting to do all kinds of music and all kinds of formats, you know. So I think the big challenge there is creating yourself opportunity. One of my mentors, who's not anybody I mentioned, a guy I was on the road with, the guy who developed the Jack Daniels show, told me, he said, you know, luck is where preparedness meets opportunity.
Right.
And I've always thought that that's a great way of looking at this. And we oftentimes create our own luck. You go to school, learn your stuff, but then you had to put yourself out there and create that networking. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges, especially as socially limited as society has become because of social media and stuff. Going someplace, meeting people, being gregarious, taking some chances, shaking some hands is a kind of a lost art in some regards. But I think it's still really important. And those soft skills, I think, you know, are very, very important these days as far as being able to make yourself a living doing this.
Right.
And a lot of it's just entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
Putting yourself out there, taking a few chances, you know. I tell students all the time, you know, you're going to sow a lot of seeds and a lot of them won't, you know, they'll fall on sterile ground, but all you need is one good one to germinate. But if you don't do a lot of, you know, sowing of the seeds, you never get that opportunity.
Yeah. So, I like to say also, you're going to sit in a lot of squeaky chairs while you're trying to do podcast interviews. But don't despair. Just keep moving forward.
But it is a different industry. When you were a student, when I came up in this industry, how we monetize music recording is very different than how we do it now.
Yeah.
But you still see that people are investing in studios, people are investing in technology, new technological developments are happening all the time. So there's a vibrant industry there. It's just very different. I tell students as they're coming out, be professionally agile. Don't be a one-trick pony. If you're going to be a one-trick pony, you got to be that best one. And good luck with that, right? Because there's always going to be some cat out there who's a little bit better than you are. So early in your career, if you can go record a jingle and then go record a master and then go do someone's front of house, or go install somebody's patch bay, and you can do those types of things early in your career, you can cobble together a living. And then along those lines, along some point, something's going to become your thing and people start recognizing you for doing that thing.
Yeah.
And then you can start monetizing that.
OWC is your one-stop shop for flexible drive storage and connectivity solutions for your studio. The Mini Stack STX for your Mac Mini adds 2 additional drives over a universal SATA HDD SSD bay and an NVMe M.2 PCIe SSD, plus 3 additional Thunderbolt USB-C ports. The OWC Thunder Bay 4 chassis, built like a tank, gives you 4 hot-swappable 2.5-inch RAID configurable drive bays, plus an extra Thunderbolt 3 jack for daisy chaining up to 5 devices. Or check out the OWC Gemini Thunderbolt 3 dock with 2 RAID configurable drives and 7 ports of connectivity, including a front-side SD card reader, 1 gig Ethernet, 2 USB 3.2 ports, a dedicated display port, and an additional backward-compatible Thunderbolt port. Get your studio connected with the Mini Stack STX, Thunder Bay 4, and Gemini Thunderbolt 3 dock at macsales.com/rockstars. Use the custom link in our show notes because it's a great way for you to help support this podcast. So thanks, Rockstars. So I'm going to add to that because I feel like this is a tough lesson to learn sometimes. As you get good at doing that thing, you do need to remember that whatever you're doing has to somehow connect with other people, which is part of the networking thing you said. Sometimes it's part of making sure you're working with artists and on projects that will actually have the follow through to get released to the world.
Yes.
Sometimes it's just knowing that you're going to have to put in additional time after you do the thing to also tell your own story about the thing you did.
Right.
So that you're self-promoting. Sometimes it's just, following through on creating your own music and making sure you put it out there into the world so that people hear it and go like, wow, what you're doing is cool. I'm going to work with you.
Right. And no one's going to tell your story like you are.
Yeah.
And no one's going to come to you looking for your story, So
I was going to try and tell your story, but no, I wouldn't have done as good a job, dude.
Well, you got to take some chances and put yourself out there. I think that's a big part of it. At the end of the day, it's a people business.
Yeah.
And you can have great technical skills and great musical skills. And, if you're not a good hang, you're probably not working a lot. And I think that's part of it. So many of our students graduate to go out and be independent. It's the employment jobs per se are not quite what they were. But one of the things that we've done here at the school is we've diversified our holdings, like I mentioned earlier. We're doing live sound. We're doing sound for picture. We're doing studio recording. We're doing electronic music, anything to do with pro audio, broadcasting stuff. And we try to enable students in that way. But so many of us are now hanging up our own shingles and being our own entrepreneurs. And the other big challenge in that is knowing the business side.
Yeah.
The
business side is tricky because it changes.
Yeah.
What you think is the business side when you're in school, you leave school and you're like, oh, the business side is something else,
Yeah.
And that's got to be tricky to teach too, because, and that actually is the next question from both me and from the artificial intelligence is how do you stay current with the latest technology and techniques in the recording industry?
Well, the first thing, and this goes back to teaching students, I can teach you this console, and I can teach you how to make that work. And that's useful, but that's only part of the knowledge. What's more important to me is that you learn how to learn.
Yeah.
And if I can teach you how to learn, now I've bulletproofed you for the rest of your career. If I teach you by rote how this thing works and I know to push this button in this instance, that's not going to, pay you forward. It's not going to help your career in the long run. But if I can teach you how to think about that, and how to find the information you need and, learn how to learn, I think that's one of our biggest challenges as teachers these days.
So that was some of the stuff that I can report back to you, having gone out into the world. I found myself in studios where I was surrounded by people that knew how to make cool sounds come out of things, and they knew how to have a vision for the musical production or to use some of the stuff that we had and get results. But I found that I had been empowered with, an understanding of like, how does what is the difference between these microphones, their pickup patterns, their directionality? How exactly does a compressor really work? What are these different things that a compressor does? I found myself in situations where like we're trying to figure out how to hook up MIDI things, and I'm breaking it down in my head. Well, this is how MIDI works. I learned from Dan, that the first 8-bit word that comes in is the header that's going to tell this MIDI thing what's coming next and stuff like that. And it just, not that I really knew all that or could speak it fluently, but I understood how to break it down and understand why something wasn't or wasn't working, why we would need to sync clocks between things so that stuff would work, because it was just, this thing didn't know when this other thing was happening otherwise, stuff like that. And it was really helpful. And I found myself, maybe it was just enough to be dangerous at times, but it always made me much more confident about trying to solve problems in the studio. And the biggest thing I learned from being in studios is there is always a problem.
Yes.
There will never not be a problem.
Right. And how you handle that problem is key to success.
Yeah.
I was telling my analog engineers in class yesterday, I say, I might have a problem during a session, and the client would never know it. Right. They don't need to know that this channel doesn't work on this console. They know that they're not working right now.
Yeah.
So my job is, they don't care about that. My job is to make it happen now. And you have to learn that sometimes. Sometimes people want to make it about themselves, and it's not. It's about that client and that song and that artist and that music, and it's so not about you as an engineer or producer.
Yeah. I've had a couple of things that come to mind. One is I found myself in my studio when people come in. Sometimes I tell a client, I'm just like, by the way, that expression on my face is my normal expression, so disregard it. It doesn't mean anything's wrong. It's just how I look when I'm like hooking up everything. So just enjoy yourself,
Yeah, right.
And another one is, a great memory of solving something in the moment for me, of which there have been many, was down at my Bonnaroo hay bale studio. And we had a digital console with us for that one. And we had everything set up and it's all routed, and we're going, snakes and microphones in through preamps into this console. It's all coming mixed down and going over to the mastering guy and everything. And something happened. Like it just froze. The console just froze. And it was just like nothing works. And we had the Wood brothers in there. And so it's this trio. They're great guys, but they're ready to go.
Right.
There's only 3 guys and we were doing a 1 microphone recording. So it's like, we're ready to start the song right this second, and video's ready to roll. And I was like, shit, I don't have a studio. And finally, I grabbed a mic cable and I raced out to the other room, plugged it directly into the power supply of this tube mic, ran it through the door, went right past my entire recording gear, went right to the back of the mic, pre-unpatched it, plugged it right in there, output of that, ran it directly over to the mastering guy, just skipped everything.
Right.
And we were rolling, within like a couple of minutes, and nobody lost their, we didn't lose the whole session.
Well, that's, part of that's thinking on your feet, but also part of that is your knowledge to have that wherewithal to say, okay, I got to make this happen right now.
Signal flow, learned it from you,
that
dude.
Signal flow stuff.
Yeah.
Exactly. But I don't know what I was going to say.
I don't know either. Rock and roll, rock stars, rock and roll. All right, here's another question. So this one comes in from our friend ChatGPT. And this one says, yeah, there you go. Can you share your insights on the role of the recording engineer in the creative process of music production? That's actually a great question, because I found myself very often struggling with, I'm technically proficient. I'm a little bit technically smarter than, the rest of my bandmates or whatever. So therefore I'm the guy who's recording this, but I really want to be creative, and I got a lot of things to say creatively. And that carried through right into making records, for a long time, pretty much till today.
I think the most important thought there, especially early in your career, is it's a service-oriented business. You're there to service the client. Now, that client could be the artist, could be the producer. It's always the music, whatever the product is. And, it's that first in my mind. How do I make you look good in front of your client?
Yeah.
How do I make your song sound better? Can I do to help you perform better?
Help you have a great session.
Exactly. And that's a multitude of things. That's not just what I'm doing technically. It's what I say on talkback. If I use talkback at all, as an engineer, I might not even touch it. It might be the purview of the producer only, but I think of myself a lot of times as a facilitator first, maybe a creator second. They're not necessarily hiring me for my opinion if I'm just an engineer, right? My job is to facilitate everybody else, and to elevate what's going on sonically, make it sound as good as possible. But I do think about, I'm here for you first. That's my primary gig. And, we can talk about how it sounds, as we work.
One of the things that I've found helpful for myself too, is when I find that I have creative suggestions or production suggestions, but it hasn't been clear that they came to me for that at first, I'll just say, there's no producer in the room, for example, common situation, you're engineering and there's no producer who's helping on this end. I'll say, would you, by the way, would you like me to share any feedback about, like, if I have ideas for this, would you like, and more often than not, people say, yeah. And then sometimes they say, no, we got it. We're good. Thanks so much or whatever. And either way, it can be the thing you just said, which is trying to help and just saying, I have this available if it's helpful. And if not, if they say yes, great, you offer it. And if they say no, you just focus on what you need to focus on.
For the young engineers especially, but also for the young producers, it's not your record. Okay. Yeah. And I got told that one time, it's not your record. It's not about you. It's about the music, the artist primarily, right?
Yeah.
And you might have this great idea, but it may not be wanted in certain circumstances. And you have to understand that, it might be your name that gets a credit if you're lucky. Okay. And that goes with you, but it's not your record.
Do you have that conversation with the engineering class and with the production class?
Yes, I talk to all of my students about that.
Yeah.
Because especially, you get to be a senior in college and you've been running your own show, you start thinking it is your record, right? But when someone's paying you in the profession, and unless they are paying you for your opinion, it is so not your record.
Yeah.
As a producer told me once, the artist name goes on the front. If you're lucky, you might get a credit in the back, right? So it's their record, and you have to service that and honor that.
Good news is the artist probably doesn't get to make as many records as you get to make.
Well, that's probably true too. And there are oftentimes that exactly what you're saying. They're looking for you for some advice and for some help, but you do have to assess whether or not it's wanted. And I think your approach is just right. I have a few ideas on here I'll share if you'd like, but I'm happy to just do my job too.
Yeah. And the thing is, like, as an engineer, as you become more experienced too, you learn a lot of problem solving in the studio, in the control room. And that problems that get solved, it is a wide gray area between whether it's a technical problem or a production problem.
Right.
And so you very likely do have a lot of talents and skills that you could contribute. It's a question of tactfully navigating the communication so that you're finding out like which ones are helpful and which ones they've already got covered.
Right. Right.
Because
exactly.
you don't, it's not, you're right. It's not your record. It's not your place to present your creative vision, that's butting heads with their creative vision.
Right.
But if you identify what creative vision they might appreciate or what does align with them, and then you also know this technique that would be helpful, they might not know that yet. And so they might really appreciate, your way of comping a vocal or your way of helping them find the right tempo in the control room or whatever. Those might be useful things.
Well, I had a producer once that I kept trying to work with and he wouldn't hire me, and I finally got to him one day and said, "Come on, man, what's up?" He goes, "You have a master's degree. I never went to college. What do you need a college degree, much less a master's degree for to do this?" And my answer was like, "I didn't. That's just the path that I took. This is just how I got here." He goes, "I can't tolerate a situation," and this was a confidence thing, and I'm not going to mention who this was, but he's like, "I never went to college, and I can't be in a situation where I got somebody smarter in the room with me around my clients." And I said, "I won't do that to you. I'm working for you. I'm not and I'm working for them. I'm not working for me. And my job is not to steal your gig."
Yeah.
And finally I broke the ice with that individual and finally started hiring me for gigs. And then we did some really great records, and I'm very appreciative to him, but I also understand where he was coming from. Who's this hotshot kid who thinks he's full of it and who's got these advanced degrees? It's like, okay, he came from the school of hard knocks. I get it. So, just give me a shot and I can show you that I can be the guy that you need me to be.
And I remember having a situation where I was in the studio and this outside producer came in to work with a band that I already knew. And he came to produce them at the studio that I knew. And so I think he came in, feeling a little bit of, nervousness about being appreciated for, what he was trying to offer to it. And as I gave him a tour around the studio, I just said to him, I was like, instead of just to dispel any of those kind of fears, I was like, "Hey, I'm here to help you and assist you. My job is to make you look like an amazing producer on this session. So anything that I can do for you, just let me know." And he told me later, he was like, "Man, that just really blew me away. And I really appreciated that." And that was, and then we had a great working relationship.
Yeah, it's a very similar circumstance. Exactly. So part of this thing also is your ability to read a situation and to read people.
Yeah.
That's so
I wasn't
important.
always good at that.
I had to learn how to do it.
I mean, I thought you could just show up with the same paper for two different classes and turn it in one after the other.
Expect not to get busted, right?
I don't even remember that, man. I don't remember that. Whatever it was, I'm sure it was related to beer, band practice, and time.
Yeah, most likely. And in fairness, you had already done the assignment for the other class, right? So I wanted you to go out and find another article, but it's okay. Yeah, we got by it, and here we are.
All right, so let's see. Here's another one. How do you integrate hands-on experience and theoretical knowledge in your classes? And what are some of the practical projects your students work on? That sounds like an AI question. That really does, doesn't it?
It certainly does,
Hands-on versus theoretical.
Well, I think you have to have a balance of both. And I think one of the great secrets of success here at MTSU is the fact that we try to afford the students as much studio and lab time as possible.
Yeah.
I can talk about what to do with a filter on a console all day long, but until you turn the knob and you have a musician on the other side of the glass and you're trying to do the work, that really doesn't come home. So we're very project-oriented in most of our classes here, and that's across our curriculum, whether it's music business or audio engineering, to try to create practical experiences to take the classroom knowledge and put it to work.
I remember it.
And try to do it immediately.
Like going in, just the whole process of booking studio time in school. It was very intense. And I think you're saying it still is today.
Yes, we call it Piranha Minute.
Yeah, Piranha Minute. Yeah, back then, Piranha Minute was we had to go to the computer lab, log on to an old Macintosh SE, and then log into some, dial-in network thing. And then everything looked like little, parentheses and X's and everything. And you had to find your times and book them and hit the go button for the entire semester. You had to book out every bit of studio time you wanted to book in any of the studios,
Right.
and then just hope that you came out of the lottery okay.
Yeah, we still do the lottery, unfortunately, and it happens today.
You kind of have to because everybody wants in to the studio.
We are thinking about a rolling type of calendar and doing other ways of doing it. But, it's always been problematic.
Yeah. But the good news
back
is,
in your day, people figured out how to do macros and they could do their entire semester booking with a key click.
I don't think I figured that out.
Yeah.
I think I was just lucky to get in there. But also I knew enough people that somebody wanted me to do a session with them anyway. But the takeaway is that the studio was just booked around the clock.
Right.
So it's like people were in there doing sessions. Your session might start at midnight. It might start at 4 in the morning.
Right.
And go till 8 in the morning.
And we still do that.
4-hour blocks or 8-hour blocks if you got two together. And you just stayed up all night long doing sessions. The funny takeaway was you could spend 8 hours just setting up your mix and not actually getting anything done,
Right.
Because we didn't know what we were doing. We were learning it all,
And studio time got used for a lot of different things in those days. It still does, I suspect, but,
It might be more legal now, that's all.
Maybe. But I will say this also, much to your credit, Lidge, you were the guy who would book a studio session and go and play with a compressor for 4 hours and try to push it as far as you could to see what it was capable of doing. And that's part of your current success, is that curiosity, that desire, that passion for how does this thing work and how can I employ it in a way that makes sense musically in some production someplace.
Yeah, thanks.
And I think that's a big part of why you're as successful as you are, because you always had that curiosity and that burning desire. You were a sponge.
Well, you heard what the curiosity did to the cat, but, I'm still here.
You can skin a cat multiple ways and it doesn't like any of them, but,
Yeah, fair enough. Well, it reminds me of when I was recording here in Studio C, and I was trying to do everything the weird way. So, I did a guitar solo on that song, and I mic'd up an amp, ran a whole signal through effects, through the console, through compression, fed it back out on a headphone feed to a pair of headphones, dropped them into the bottom of the trash can. I think it was clean at the time. It was
like in there.
Yeah, and then I stereo mic'd the top of the trash can, and that was my recording of the solo. And I don't know that it sounded all that great, but it was a hell of a fun way to learn how to route all the signals and do crazy shit.
Right.
And you'd hear stories about. Later, I'd hear stories about people going and working with Brian Eno, and they're like, he went in and he ran 10 things together with the H3000, and it was the craziest sound ever. And I loved hearing stuff like that,
Mm-hmm. I remember doing some early hip hop and rap sessions, and, these guys would come in with these 808s and stuff and hand syncing them. And I'm thinking, this is crazy. This will never work, but it was awesome. It's just like, wow,
Yeah.
It was illuminating to me that, okay, we can make this work. This is a viable thing. Technically my brain's going, no, but they're like, just trust me, let's do this,
All right. So let me ask you that question. Forget AI for a minute.
Okay.
Let me ask you that question. Since I started having interns and I'd have them come from MTSU and other schools to my studio, I saw this shift over time from people that understood recording a full band, and using analog tape, that fading away, but even the full band and microphones fading away.
Mm-hmm.
And then it became this, oh, wow, your experience is really like a laptop and one microphone. And that's how you think of producing music. In all fairness, I'm seeing a little bit of a shift back to recording a band and people getting interested in that. So it may have just been some of the phase of the introduction of computer music and, Logic sessions, Fruity Loops, things like that,
FL Studio.
FL Studio,
Right.
That kind of loop-based production with a processed vocal over it. What kind of stuff do you see with students, a tendency towards how people like to make music, where it's coming from, where it's going? And then also where do you see issues where, maybe everything fits too neatly in a box now and people need to break out of that? The whole idea of like hand syncing to drum machines like that.
Drum machines, yeah.
Yeah, versus everything just gets pulled from a loop bin and it perfectly lines up on the grid.
It's an interesting continuum. We still, like in a first engineering class, want students out there using microphones, recording instruments. But I teach a capstone course called studio production, and I actually want to drop the studio from it. I just want to call it music production. Of course, School of Music probably wouldn't like that. But
what is capstone course?
It's at the end of the program.
Okay, cool.
Okay, so, you've had all the basics, and now you're taking the advanced electives. So this semester, about half of my students are doing things that really need the recording studio. They're doing like Americana or rock band, and we need to, get in there and do a rhythm section and overdubs and stuff. But the other half of the class is essentially doing desktop production because they're doing hip hop and rap and, those types of genres. And I want them at that level to have the freedom to bring whatever resource they have available to them to their creative juices and to make the best record they can. But if you're taking your first engineering class from me, I want you to learn how to use these microphones, and I want a band or some kind of situation like that. So at least you have that backbone to when later on you can apply that knowledge to the desktop kind of stuff. So that has evolved a lot. We used to link the production class with an advanced music engineering class, and I found it limiting ultimately. Because students weren't able to, they always had to have stuff that was studio-based. And, genres like hip-hop and rap were not being produced a lot in those classes. And I found that since I de-linked those things and give them the ability to do whatever they want technically, outcomes have been so much higher.
That's cool.
In a way, it's bad, though. And the where it comes bad is it allows them to work in their comfort zone and doesn't necessarily push them out of it as much as we might have in an earlier time.
Adam Audio introduces the all-new A-Series line of monitors, featuring the XART accelerated ribbon tweeter design, built-in DSP-based room correction, and speaker voicings, allowing you to customize your Adam Audio monitors to your control room. The A-Series will rock in any studio. Small studio spaces or immersive multi-speaker configurations are perfect for the A4V or the new A7V, the next generation of the incredibly popular A7X. Mid-sized rooms and narrow spaces will love the low-profile A44H, expanding on the A7V sound, or the A77H, a true three-way midfield monitor delivering rich, spacious sound. And bigger studios will love the A8H, a three-way speaker and the pinnacle of the A-Series that delivers extremely accurate sound required for critical listening environments. Get the Adam Audio monitors and subwoofers that are right for your studio with an extended 5-year warranty at adamaudio.com. Well, it is fascinating for me having seen initially learning the fundamentals of recording, multi-tracks, consoles, signal flow, all that, how does signal go in and out, did work for adopting the electronic elements of music production, right? Because you still had to plug them into something.
That's right.
But then everything moved into the computer, and then the fundamentals get cloudy because it's like, what is MIDI now? MIDI, it's like, it doesn't, it's actually not necessarily a thing in the same way because, an app and plug-in sync thing, they're all just talking to each other in computer languages internally, whereas it used to be, this cable and, still is in some situations.
Well, like
so
Logic.
It's just fascinating to see that. And then even understanding fundamentals of chopping up things and moving them around and timing, aligning things start to become irrelevant because tools don't care about that. An auto-tune plugin, what's possible with some of the automatic production elements almost makes how they work irrelevant, in the same way it is that, like, you kind of just need to know how to plug something in. You don't have to know how electricity works in the power outlet,
right?
For in a lot of cases,
right.
In my case, I do have to know that because I like knowing that.
Well, the learning signal flow is like eating your Wheaties, and it applies to everything still. Even if you're just, thinking about how you manipulating this in software, it's still a signal flow type of process, So that's part of it. But I'm sure you've seen this in your studio, musicians who have become, I won't say jaded or lazy, but became more reliant upon the capability of the DAW. Well, I gave you a good chorus. Can't you just fly that in everywhere else?
Right.
Or, can you fix my time? Can you fix my intonation? And they're so used to having engineers with the digital tools that can do that. We were talking about Rick Beato earlier. One of his quotes that I think is famous, is before we had Pro Tools, we had pros. Which means those players were really, really good and didn't need to have their time corrected, and didn't need to have their pitch corrected because they could sing in tune. So, and I think there's a balance there someplace with our students as far as, how much of that crutch do we need?
Yeah.
But I've had students tell me that, musicians recently say, well, can't you just fix it? My thinking is, can't you just play it?
Well, there's that joke about, like, the Pro Tools engineers recording the band, and the band finishes the take, and they're like, "How was that?" And the Pro Tools engineer's like, "It sucks. Come on in."
Right.
We're just going to chop it up anyway. So there's that performance aspect of really pushing. And that goes for everybody, whether it's the musician, the engineer, the producer. Is like, we all need to push past our comfort zone and try harder,
right?
Without over trying. It still needs to be like that Zen sweet spot of getting the right stuff. But when I think about music, like electronic music, EDM, and things like that, those could be seen as places where, like, well, you are supposed to create it here and copy paste it. But I also think that the very best EDM music involves producers that really push those boundaries, and they don't take the easy route on creating sounds and stuff like that.
Right.
And they look for ways to come up with something that's original.
Exactly.
And, make it their own and make it a great version of their own thing.
Whether it's a sonic thing or a musical thing or whatever that might be. Yeah, you're exactly right.
Yeah.
One of the things that, we teach a lot of electronic music classes, and students will go in there and they'll have projects. And I want to put a moratorium on length,
Oh, you mean like let's bring back the 3.5 minute song?
Yeah, exactly. Because, it's just like, do we really need that last repetition of that,
Yeah, exactly.
And it's so easy in that forum just to, keep it going,
Yeah, that's true. And I mean, it's funny because the experience of what is the right length for stuff, it really does depend on the experience of listening too. So there's music that makes sense longer because of how you might experience it. Maybe it is more of a background thing and it doesn't command your full attention for the full length of time.
Yeah, when I teach the production class, one of the things I emphasize is, you have an audience out there. And we tend to forget about them. It's like, what are their values? What are their realities? Okay, what are they willing to listen to? How long are they willing to listen to? And, our time as a society, everybody's attention spans are getting shorter.
Right.
So, how fast do you hook them and can you keep them hooked? And we had to think about those things. And,
but then you have DJ music, which might actually be longer, and you want to have extended intros and outros because they need to get mixed together.
Right, because we're doing dubstep, it's going to go in the club, so we do need all those repetitions.
Yeah, or like I wonder if a party song is a longer version too, just for the background,
Right.
We're not listening, we're having a conversation, but the music is there kind of thing.
Right, and all these other things like ambience, and things like that are long form,
Yeah.
by
nobody
design.
wants a 5-minute massage. They want a
That's right.
45-minute
That's
massage.
right? So.
Okay, what else was I just going to say about that? Oh, the other fascinating thing to me has been the shift in what is sound, the shift in frequencies, the shift in musical octaves, useful musical octaves. So with digital music, there was like it introduced a new set of octaves into musical production that kind of freaking took over, if we'll be honest about this too.
Well, when we departed from putting things on vinyl records and all of a sudden had freedom in the low end.
Yep. And digital became this huge low end space. And then I don't know if the systems that play it back became that much better or not. But in some cases they did, because when you were growing up, everybody didn't have subs.
No.
But when I was, even when I was growing up, everybody didn't have subs, but now everybody has subs.
Well, the playback technology has changed, but we also had the phenomenon of home theater, you know, and that's when people started getting comfortable and putting those things in their homes, but, you go into recording studios, you used to never see near fields with a sub.
Right.
But it's very common now. And we use Carl Tatz to tune everything, and Carl uses the subs in a very interesting way, because it does give you that low-end extension on your near fields, which are going to roll off about 50 hertz, 55, around there anyway. Yeah. But it also tunes and conditions that low end to where it's working in the room. When we built our new studios, Carl came over and he's like, well, let's start with the subs in the corner. And they did not end up there. They ended up in a whole other place, but he worked it until he found, okay, this is where the room is working with the speakers and the mains and the near fields. And, And
that's a fascinating thing, because then you're like, obviously what you described is not what every consumer does for their listening situation, but creating music in a space where everything adds up just right, can translate, I think. I mean, how do you feel about it? Do you feel like that does translate to a better listening experience on the other end with the consumer rig?
Yeah, I think so, ultimately. I think, like you said, we have new octaves now and new information that we can deal with. That certainly has transformed the user experience, the listener experience.
Yeah.
And I think in mostly good ways. Now, we could look at a lot of product out there that's just product, and that may not be benefiting from that. But
let's talk about the records that are really good. We don't have to talk about the ones that aren't good.
That's right. Right.
But I mean,
I also have to think about how consumers listen now. I think that's a big shift over the arc of my career. When I was a teenager, we put on an album side, and that was the primary entertainment for the next 22 and a half minutes. And we would sit and listen to the record. Right. Well, the average consumer doesn't do that anymore. They're putting in their earbuds and going jogging.
Right.
If they're listening at all, it might be in the car when they can't have other visual stimulus in front of them. And, we multitask with music as consumers now much more than we ever did.
Yeah.
So it's how the average consumer consumes music is very different now, and we can see that reflected in the products sometime that's out there.
Yeah, that's true, and everything is all about the playlist these days. And I don't mean the playlist like you get on the right playlist and your music gets heard by lots of people. I mean your music is heard right after a song and right before the next song. Mm-hmm. And they just go back to back. And that experience is what ultimately created, homogenous sounds on the radio, and then also the loudness wars for radio as well. And then in other places. And I think it probably creates, I hear, I'm not going to pretend like I don't hear a lot of interesting, cool stuff out there now. But you do hear a lot of stuff that sounds very same, and I think it probably has everything to do with the fact that if the low end and the bass drum, if the boom, the 808 boom and the hi-hat were different on this song from the one before it, it just wouldn't sound like it fit in the playlist. At times.
Right. Well, you go to Spotify and you find the style guide on the delivery. Right. And they expect everybody to conform to that. So does Apple.
Right.
And that's, and this whole thing with Atmos, is going to be interesting. And I keep thinking that, like, here we go again. How many times have we been down this path?
Right.
I'm old enough to remember quad in the 70s as a failed format, and that didn't work.
My MCI console was a quad console.
Did you have joysticks?
No, it didn't have joysticks. Okay. It just had an A bus and a B bus, and you had sliders.
There you go.
Slide between front stereo and back stereo.
But,
But yeah, that Atmos has come up a lot on the podcast. So I haven't mentioned this, but I'll bring it up now, which is I've been thrilled to have some of my classmates from my time at MTSU with you also on the podcast. Chris James is one of them. He went on to work with Prince as Prince's engineer.
Right.
And now he's doing these incredible Atmos mixes, including having done the remix for Rumors. And then also...
Oh, really? I didn't know he did it.
Yeah, he did Rumors.
Wow.
And then he's also doing these amazing live Atmos mixes for Prince concerts for the Prince estate. And it's just... or I guess the artist formerly known as Prince Estate. I don't know how it is now. But great stuff. And then also Jamie Tate has been on the podcast, and we talked about his work at Ruckus Room and Reed Shippen, F. Reed Shippen.
Well, you went through with a pretty powerful group.
Yeah.
A lot of those guys and gals are doing pretty well here, you had a pretty good cohort for sure.
It's pretty fun to see it all coming around. And a big part of it is, they say in the music business, success is to just still be standing on the road,
Right. Yeah.
So I'm
we see that,
glad to be able to say that we're still here making music,
And you see that in all sectors, even the manufacturing sector, How many domestic U.S. console manufacturers are there in 2023?
Domestic U.S.? Well, API.
And?
Is Mackie still making boards here? No,
I don't know if they're ever made them here, actually.
And SSL's in the UK, right?
Right.
Well, and they're here too, but
but the manufacturer,
right.
But, there used to be a lot more. There used to be Spectrasonics. There used to be Audiotronics. There used to be...
Spectra 1964.
Right.
Well, they're not making... I didn't know that Bill's making full-size consoles yet, but he's hopefully he will. Come on, Bill.
And the console thing has kind of come around a little bit too. Yeah. But, I look at API, you could argue that they're one of the more successful console manufacturers, but they're also kind of the last guy standing doing that thing.
Right.
Okay. So, that same thing applies.
Paul Wolf, we just had Paul on the show.
Oh, did you really?
Yeah,
that's cool.
Do you ever feel like the time that you've spent watching YouTube videos, trying out mix tricks, and tweaking version after version of your mixes has gotten you nowhere? Have you been looking for a simple, straightforward, step-by-step process for creating a pro mix that won't take you years to learn? What if you could have a Grammy-winning mix engineer who understood all your mixing struggles and could coach you through them? If you struggle with any of these questions, then the Ultimate Mixing Masterclass is just for you. Now you can discover the proven step-by-step mix system from Grammy-winning mixer Craig Alvin for consistently creating a pro-quality mix from your home studio that will sound amazing everywhere. Listen to this quote from one of our students, David. Quote, "Absolutely the most informative and helpful block of information and mentoring on the mix process that I've ever been a part of. That was like sitting behind a mix engineer for years, watching and picking up tips along the way, but condensed into a 6 to 7 hour session." Close quote. Look, I'm so confident that this will take your mixes to the next level that if you can't get a killer mix within 30 days, I'll give you a full refund, no questions asked. So if you're ready to take your mixes to Grammy-winning quality, then go to ultimatemixingmasterclass.com and start now by checking out the free preview of the Ultimate Snare Mixing Trick. And I'll see you at the front row table of the Grammys. Cheers. Yeah. So it's true. So stick around, rock stars. That's pretty much the takeaway there. So Dan, we've been going for a good long stretch, and I love it, man. Okay. I do have one question that I think we should answer. How long does it take to get a degree in audio engineering? What are some of the requirements for new students? And what are some of the challenges for students getting that degree? How would you like to talk to prospective audio students?
Well, our undergraduate degree is still designed for you to be able to complete it in 4 years. And that's something that we strongly believe in. Now, you can accelerate that in a couple different ways. One way is to, if you're still in high school, take AP classes and knock out your gen ed stuff, right? A lot of students will go to the community college and knock out their gen ed stuff, and then they can come here and finish up in 2 years. Not the best plan, in my opinion. There's part of it just being at a university for 4 years, which is a cool experience and part of that.
Yeah.
And the longer you're here, the deeper dive you can take. And that's true at any institution.
I'll say when I was here, one of my biggest takeaways was just the peer group.
Yeah.
That was one of the greatest values for me, was to just
absolutely
be immersed in a group of peers and friends who all they cared about was making records, just like me.
And that's one of the cool things about our program here is that still exists.
Yeah.
It really exists at the grad level where they're, only 14 per year and they're going through in lockstep, and they really become a tight cohort. But even at the undergraduate level, you have classmates that you go through the program with and end up working with in the industry. That's the other thing that we think about. I tell students all the time is like, look at the student sitting next to you. They might hire you someday. So if you're acting like an idiot now, guess what may not happen, because you're being assessed. Yeah. I tell students all the time, everything you do is an audition for your next gig, whether it's an assignment for me or whatever. People are paying attention to what you're doing.
Everybody you meet might be your next boss.
That's right.
Including the intern.
That's right. That's exactly right. Or the person sitting next to you in class.
Yeah, the person delivering your lunch might be your next boss on the most important record you ever made or never made.
Right.
Depending on how you acted at the time,
But people are constantly assessing, how are you acting? How are you conducting yourself? Are you being professional? And, it doesn't start when you graduate. It starts when you walk in that classroom the first day and say, hey, I'm Dan, and how you conduct yourself in those situations, people pay attention to. I kind of got derailed thought off of your question.
Oh, that's all right. I was just going to give a shout out to David Strite, too.
David,
who has not been on the podcast yet, but we reconnected recently.
Oh, you need to get David on your podcast.
Yeah, he's doing cool stuff out in Oregon.
I hear from David periodically, and he'll come to town, and we'll go to do lunch and stuff. Yeah, he's a very interesting and talented guy from my hometown of Louisville, Kentucky.
Oh, right on, right on.
I was going to say something else about the students and Atmos and all that stuff, but I derailed
some of the challenges for getting a degree too.
The challenges. Apply yourself while you're here. Don't come and just stick your nose in a book for 4 years. Do the extracurricular stuff. So if we have a guest speaker, go to it, okay, and try to introduce yourself. You got to try to get to know people. The networking component is so critical these days.
Yeah.
And it's networking with your classmates and being willing to work with your classmates and talk to your classmates, but avail yourself of opportunities. And I think that's one of the most key advice I can give you. Part of the college experience is not just what happens in the classroom or in the studio.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I tell my interns, my internship might be different from others, but in my case, I always tell my interns, if you're interning with me at the Toy Box Studio, you're not on the sideline. You're part of everything we're doing because there's nowhere else to be, It's like you're immersed in it. And so like anybody that we're doing a session with, you have technically met them, and I suggest that if you dug meeting that person, you take advantage of the chance that's a contact you just made. Right. So you should be exchanging contact information, if you get the chance.
And I talk to students about that a lot. I said, somebody gives you a business card, what do you do with it? And a lot of times I go, I don't know, stick it in my wallet. So, yeah, but what then? It's like reach out to them. Say, hey, I met you at this AES event or wherever you met them, and just touch back and reach back to them a little bit and say, hey, man, I really appreciated speaking with you. Maybe we could do it again sometime.
Yeah.
Just those little things like that can make a big difference, and people remember that stuff.
Yeah, they do. Yeah.
So,
a couple more tips, rock stars, related to that. Oh, go ahead.
But one other thing that you were talking about, I'd like to latch on to, a big challenge for students these days is they're not just students. Okay, when I went to school, I was a full-time student, and I can concentrate on my studies. But more often than not, students are having to gig or having to work or having to do other things to support themselves. So it's not just school isn't the thing that they're doing. So time management becomes a really important thing. And then making good choices, okay? You talk about the intern being part of the process. Well, my favorite place to send interns right now are people like you, independent engineers and producers with their own room. But if they're doing it during the semester while they're taking 18 hours, they can only show up on Tuesdays and Thursdays for 4 hours. There's no way in the world that you can integrate them in that project. So maybe we make a better choice of let's intern in the summer, dedicate my time to doing that internship in the summer so I can be there every day when they're doing that album project. And then maybe I can get integrated.
Right.
Now, of course, you have to bring the goods to that situation, and they don't want to integrate you because of what you're doing. But
and a challenge, honestly, with small independent studios is somebody like me is also taking a little bit of a summer break like a student might. So,
right.
It could be a challenge of schedule and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But I also, for a long time, I had one hell of an opportunity for interns, which was my Bonnaroo hay bale studio. If they showed up in June, we go down there and spend a week at the Bonnaroo Festival, and that was pretty cool.
Well, I've always appreciated you as an internship provider because it's not just a warm body to go get coffee. You're trying to teach them something and try to make them part of that process.
Right. And go get coffee.
Well, that's part. We got to pay the dues, right? And I have no problems with
we
them.
just needed coffee.
Well, that's true too. But that's part of it. And I've had some amazing things. I've had 2 students earn Grammys as interns.
That's amazing.
But they were doing those summer interns where they could be there every day, and they got credit on the album, and the album won a Grammy.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a pretty cool way to start. And then you can just say you're Grammy winning.
Well, where do you go from there, though? I mean,
Yeah, I know. Grammy winning intern. I'm a Grammy winning intern here. Well, I do see some of that, and what that does though is it at least opens a few doors for the next opportunity.
Yes.
It doesn't guarantee anything at all.
That's right.
But every time you have something good happen, it potentially opens another door for you, which you got to go, double down on your effort and try and make that grow into something really useful. I was going to share a feedback for interns too.
Okay.
And for making contacts with people. So one of the questions I like to ask interns when they come to meet with me is a bit of a trick question. It's, what do you know about me? It's a fair question.
Yeah.
And a lot of times they don't know shit, or maybe they just visited one website or didn't really even Google it. And I think that is a great tip for trying to go out and do something. So for example, here I am doing an interview with you. And one of the things I did is I made sure to get your bio and I read through it, and I got to put together a playlist and listen to your music. And I know not tons, but now I know a lot more after 2 hours of chatting with you. But, I knew more than I did beforehand. And to really make an impact as an intern, I recommend that you go and you do a little homework before you show up. It doesn't have to be much, but if you show up and you just point out things that you found really interesting, it doesn't need to be much. It just shows somebody that you know who they are and you're there for a reason. And I think that's a good follow-up contact info thing too. You might not be applying for an internship, but you met somebody and you Googled them and wow, I didn't know you worked on this record.
Right.
That was such a great record. Now you got somebody's attention in a follow-up email. And then my last tip to go with that, Rockstars, is when you send out that email, don't expect to hear back right away, but you get you either use the snooze feature in Google Gmail, or you get the boomerang plugin, and then you just schedule that email to cycle back to yourself in 2 weeks or 1 week or whatever. And then if they didn't reply, you just, hey, just wondering, just checking in again, or wonder if you saw that email. Yeah. Because people are busy.
Well, yes, exactly right. There's a lot to unpack about what you just said, but I think in my own defense, being the intern coordinator, I do say, do some research on the places you want to go to.
Yeah.
So when you walk into that interview, you're not walking in blind. You have some knowledge about where they're coming from, what they do, what they value, things like that.
Yeah. Whether it's internship that you're trying to connect with or possible future, work and opportunity.
Right.
Don't show up asking for favors. Show up offering help.
Right. Exactly. I love that. That's it exactly.
Because that's what's going to get people's attention, because everybody's trying hard to do something.
It's not about what you as an internship provider can do for me. It's I want to learn from you is the guidance. Yeah. What can I do to help you? And can I learn from you in that process?
I love having interns in the studio. It's definitely been both really beneficial and plenty of hard work. Mm-hmm. And it's just been a super positive experience.
But you invest in them. You work hard with them.
Yeah, I really appreciate seeing people.
What was the young woman
started.
that you had not too long ago? Alicia?
I'm trying to remember. We had
but you were
I had some great women who were there starting out, but I think it was like right before 2020 or something like that.
Yeah, so, it's been a minute, but
we got closed down.
you made a huge difference.
Oh,
whether
good.
You realize that
great.
For more than one of your interns, but her in particular, she talked about how that experience was life-changing.
That's great. That's great. I love hearing that.
Kudos for you. And like I said, you've been one of my favorite intern providers for quite a while.
Well, thanks, man. You're one of my favorite providers of interns.
Well, we try to find you some good ones,
Well, that's awesome. Well, dude, we should probably close out here. But it's been totally awesome having you on the show.
Yeah,
and I do have a closing question for you.
Sure.
This one is hypothetical, and I like to ask it of all my guests. But we're going to take the Wayback Studio machine, and you get to go back in time and go find young Dan. And you're going to tap yourself on the shoulder and say, listen, dude, I've come back in time with superpowers from the future to give you this one bit of advice. Here's the single most important thing you need to know to be a rock star of the studio yourself one day. What advice would you like to go back and give yourself? And if you want to tell us when you're, how far back you're going, that's fine too. But
I'll go back to Memphis when I was really starting to make my living in the studio and defining myself as an audio engineer and producer. And I would be twofold. One would be you're better than you think you are, have some confidence in what you're doing. And the other one is what I said earlier, it's a people business. And I'll add one more. It's not my record.
It's not my record.
But I had confidence issues. When I first started freelancing, I had a hard time trying to figure out what I should charge.
Yeah.
I struggled mightily with that, and I undervalued myself, and I didn't get gigs because of it, because at that price, I can't be good, right? And I was afraid I was going to overvalue myself, and having that confidence in, I can do this work and I'm pretty good at it. But the other one is, it's, not about being good at being an engineer. It's about being good with people.
Yep.
And being a good hang and communicating with people and people I was introverted. So people would always think that I was, like you said, don't look at my face, right? This is the face I use when I'm setting up.
Right.
And people would
face.
misread me, and thinking, well, you want to be around him? That kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it took me a while to have that confidence that I'm okay here. I belong in this environment. I can hang with these other people.
And it's that balance. It's that middle balance, because there are also people who go out there and they're overconfident.
Oh, yeah.
Trying to compensate for a lack of internal confidence, probably. I've had that too.
Well, my dear friend Dave Aaron that I was talking about earlier, we were living in Memphis, and he gets this gig going on the road doing live sound for this band on a tour. He had never done it before. So I get a call. I'm at the studio, and he's like, what time you done? I said, about midnight. He goes, I'm coming over. I said, all right, what are we doing? He goes, I've taken this gig doing live sound, and I need to know what to do. And I said, all right, when do you start? He goes, tomorrow. We leave on tour.
That's great.
So Dave and I sat up all night, and I'm going through three-way systems and how to ring out monitors and, and how crossover networks work and all that kind of stuff.
That's a lot to cover. I took one live sound class at MTSU. It was taught by the guys from the Clare brothers.
Right.
I remember.
No, it was the Carlo.
Back
then, it was Carlo, not Claire.
And it was fascinating.
Yeah,
fascinating stuff I learned.
Rich and John, yeah.
But I will tell you my two takeaways from that class. One was if you need to mic a piano in a hurry, put a 57 in the third sound hole and you're good to go. And then the other takeaway was don't drive with the driver's side window down because it'll kill your hearing on one ear. I just heard somebody talking about that recently too.
The sun will
kill but that's a good tan. You just can't show
not if you only get it on one side.
But I mean, like, that's a lot to learn how to ring out monitors and set crossovers right and all that kind of stuff.
But Dave had enough confidence in himself, enough knowledge about audio to say, I can figure this out. I just need to get through the first couple shows.
Yeah.
So about a week later, he calls me up. This is pre-cell phone days, right? And he calls me up and said, "Where are you?" "I'm in Iowa someplace." "So you're still on the gig, right?" He goes, "Yeah, I'm still on the gig." And I said, "Well, how'd it go?" And he goes, "Well, the first couple shows were kind of rough, but I figured it out and I'm fine."
That's great.
And his whole attitude was, I never say no to a gig if I think it's somewhere reasonably in my wheelhouse. He used to come do things here. He'd come on a Friday and have a conversation with students and then pick an artist out of the crowd. And then we would do record on, one song on Saturday and he mix it on Sunday. But somebody asked him, how did you get started with all these hip hop artists? And he goes, I was the guy who could mix through the party.
Yeah, that's a big deal.
Everybody else was turning around and saying, "Shut up, I'm working," right? And those guys didn't last, but he could operate through the party. It's like you go to a hockey game and a fight and a hockey game breaks out. Well, you go to a party and a session breaks out. Yeah. And that's how those records were made. It was a social thing. So there's always stuff going on behind the mixer. And he could tolerate that and do high-level work with a party going on 2 feet behind him.
I had 2 stories I heard about sessions like those. One was Roger Mutino, who said he was working with Run DMC for like 6 months, and the monitor knob on the SSL was max constantly for 6 months. And he said, like, he just hit he's like, I can't do it anymore. And the other was, Roger went on to do many great records. But another was my buddy Adam Long up in St. Louis, who worked with artists like Nelly and stuff like that. And he did last and make it doing lots of records. But what he learned to do was he'd just put ear plugs in, and he'd crank the monitors up, and he'd be up front with earplugs in, so he couldn't hear them talking, but he heard all the bass up front.
I had one client that I worked with. We were doing rock and heavy metal, and his name was Eli, and we used to call it E-level because he would take the knob all the way up.
Yeah.
And it was hard to tolerate. So I worked out with him 2 things: that I could wear earplugs and headphones when he did that, or I could leave the room. So I could be good for the next 5 hours for him.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm not getting shot. And that worked out pretty well. But that just was a conversation with him. And he understood, what that was going on. I will say there was only one time in my entire career when I did not want to work with an artist ever again. And I told my employers, find somebody else. I'm not doing this. And what that was is we were doing this R&B record, and they had a budget, and most of the budget went up noses. So we would come in about noon and start working, and things would be okay. And about 6 o'clock, the nose candy would come out. And then everything from then on for the next 8 hours was not up to snuff.
Not getting better.
Right.
It was up to snuff. It was a little too much snuff.
Oh, yeah, exactly. So we come back in the morning and start redoing the stuff that we'd done.
Yeah.
So one part of me is like, okay, this record's taking a lot longer and I'm getting paid a day rate, so I keep getting paid. But I couldn't keep up with them on coffee. Yeah. And I got so fatigued. And I finally said, we're going to finish this record, but if you ever bring this client back in, you have to find another engineer.
Right.
That's the only time in my career I bailed on somebody.
That's smart. It's smart to have that.
And
that
I didn't really bail. I finished, but I knew that I couldn't do that.
Yeah. It's good to have that self-awareness when you finally hit your threshold. And it is hard to do. It's important to do those records where you just immerse yourself in it. And it's a great learning experience. Mm-hmm. But I always say to people, I was just saying this to a Blackbird Academy class that came to talk to me in my studio the other day, that just know that when you're in those super intensive things, you will completely lose your perspective, and you won't gain it again until you get away from it or take the break,
Yeah. And that's the other thing that I would tell young Daniel is balance in life, because I did not know that then.
Yeah.
And I would do these 140-hour weeks and live in the studio. And it was really, my sister asked me one day, you want to live to work or work to live? And that was stunning to me, because I was totally living to work.
Yeah.
And I did not have good balance in my life, and I was not a happy person. And I was doing great work, right? I was employed and I was making money and making records and living in the studio, and that's all my life was.
Yeah.
So find that balance.
I like to refer to that time of my life as my graduate school.
Yeah.
I just took 10 years of graduate school instead of 2.
Yeah. Well, but, we came through it, we benefited from it, but we also learned that we had to find that balance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So. Well, Dan, it's been totally awesome hanging with you, man. What a trip to be back here. Thank you so much for having me here. I feel really honored to be doing this interview with you. And thank you for inviting the rock stars into your world. Well, man, thank you for this. I love your podcast. And when you asked me to do it, it's like, yes, in a heartbeat, I'll do this. This is awesome, man. Next stop, Rick Rubin. Come on. How are we going to get Rick on the show? Come on, Rick. We're ready for you now. Yeah, Rick. Come on, man. We set the bar high for you. Awesome, dude. Well, thank you, rock stars. Thanks for listening. And see you around the studio, dude. All right, man. Thank you. Cheers. Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, then please share this episode with your friends on social media and leave a rating and review on iTunes to help the podcast reach more rock stars like yourself. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to rsrockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And remember to hit the subscribe button to keep up with weekly episodes. And if you're ready to make your best record ever now, then head over to Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can start with my free course at mixmasterbundle.com. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks for being a rock star. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music. Recording Studio Rockstars would like to give a big thank you to our awesome sponsors who help make this episode possible: OWC, Lewitt, Atom Audio, Isotope, and Spectra 1964. And remember, at isotope.com/rockstars, use the coupon code ROCK10 for 10% off any plugin purchase. If you enjoyed Recording Studio Rockstars, then please check out our sponsors using the link in our show notes, because it's a great way to help support this show. These are all things I highly recommend for your studio. They're going to help you make your best record ever. I would also like to thank our fantastic team here at Recording Studio Rockstars, Vlad Weselchenko and Braden Stremming, for additional podcasts and video production. Thanks so much for listening, Rockstars, and we'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.